Live mic.
Thank you. I'd like to call the February 28th Big Cypress Basin Board meeting to order. If you would please stand and join me in the Pledge of Allegiance.
Flag of the United States of America, to the republic which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Good morning, and good morning to all of the board members. It's nice to see everyone this morning. We appreciate everyone joining us both in person and by Zoom. For those joining remotely, thank you for your continued interest in the Big Cypress Basin. As a reminder, today's proceedings are accessible via Zoom as well as Collier TV and the district's website. Before we begin, I'd like to refresh everyone's memory on a couple housekeeping items. Board members, please make sure your microphone is on and that you speak into the mic so that everyone can hear you, especially the folks that are attending by Zoom. If you turn your head to talk to another board member, please bring your mic with you so that you stay on your microphone and your comments are captured. And please try to get as close to the microphone as possible. To be recognized, please use the buttons on the dais. For those here in person, if you would like to comment on an agenda item, please complete a speaker card from the lobby and bring it to the front to Buzzy, who's sitting in for Troy Miller today. If you're joining by Zoom, use the raise the hand feature and Buzzy will call on you. If you're participating via phone, *9 raises your hand and *6 mutes and unmutes your mic. That brings us to agenda revisions. Lisa Keeler, are there any agenda revisions today?
No, Madam Chair, there are not.
Okay, then brings us to agenda item extensions by board members. We'll go ahead and I'll go ahead and poll each board member for any abstentions or disclosures on the agenda. Vice Chair Waters?
None for me.
Mr. Hill?
None.
Ms. McLeod?
Me?
Mr. Romano?
For me.
Ms. Smith?
None for me.
And I do not have any. Okay, the next item is consider approval of the minutes for the October 25th meeting. Are there any corrections or additions to the minutes? If not, I'll entertain a motion to approve those minutes.
Second.
Okay, Mr. Hill moves, Ms. Smith seconds. I'll now call the vote. Vice Chair Waters?
Yes.
Mr. Hill?
Yes.
Ms. McLeod?
Yes.
Mr. Romano?
Yes.
Ms. Smith?
Yes.
And I vote yes. That's a unanimous vote. That brings us to the Basin Administrator's report. Lisa?
Good morning, Madam Chair and board members. I have two brief items for you this morning. The first is some housekeeping for your 2025 calendar year for board meetings. At your last meeting in October, you asked for an possible alternate date for this coming October. So you have in your packet the list of scheduled meetings for this year with an alternate date. Instead of your normal Friday, October 24th meeting, you have an alternate date of Thursday, October 20th. So Madam Chair, if you'd like to have that discussion and give direction, I'd be happy to do that now.
Great. In your packet, you had the two dates listed for the board meeting. As you'll recall, last meeting, we had our board dates for the year to approve, and Mr. Hill had requested an alternate date to our regular scheduled meeting. This is just a discussion. Mr. Hill can also attend by Zoom. As you know, we do have the electronic option for your attendance at this meeting. But he had just requested, since he loves these meetings so much and loves to be here in person, that he asked if he could, we could adjust the date. So, Mr. Hill, I'm going to let you say a couple words if you'd like regarding this.
Well, actually, I don't have Starlink on my boat yet. And that's where I'm going to be, because the most important, the objective of this organization is to have more fish in the water. And I'm going to be preparing for the Conservancy's Red Snook Fishing Tournament, where I have my friends from South Carolina coming to visit, which is an annual event, and it's about the only thing that I do take time off work for. So the alternative date, which I think is actually the 30th.
30th. Yes.
30th. I thought I heard 20th, just wanted to be clear.
30th.
Yes, I would prefer that if we could make that change, I would be indebted to the board members and the staff for making that change.
Other comments by the board?
I think I have a conflict that day. You said the 30th?
Yes, it would be Thursday, October 30th at 11 a.m.
Okay, I thought I had a conflict. Now I don't see it on my calendar, so
You
maybe,
should be good.
yeah, I think so.
Vice Chair Waters, any thoughts?
I'm fine with either.
Okay,
I'm fine with either.
I'm fine with it.
okay, so it sounds to me consensus of the board is that we're willing to change the date of our meeting in October to October 30th, which is a Thursday at 11 a.m. So thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you. And we will make those final changes and get that posted on our website for you. So
Thank
today.
you, Lisa. Appreciate that.
So the second item I have today is to talk about the lease that we have with Collier County. We have been leasing a second office building to them at our main campus here on North Horseshoe to them for the last 10 years. And they have expressed a desire to continue that for another 11 years. And we have negotiated that new lease amount, and we are ready to proceed with the approval and execution process. And unless you have any questions or concerns about it, we will process that, send it to the county. It will be on one of their March Board of County Commissioner agenda meetings for approval, and then we forward it to our April governing board meeting for final approval and execution. That lease currently expires in May, so we are perfectly timed to get that renewed before the expiration.
Are there any comments or questions for Lisa on the lease? I think it's very good that we continue that relationship for 11 years, which is fantastic. So thank you for your work on that.
Perfect. Thank you.
Okay.
That concludes my comments today, unless there's any questions.
Any questions for Ms. Keeler from the board? All right, that takes us to our first public comment, general public comment, which is for comments not already on, for items already not on the agenda. So Buzzy, are there any folks signed up to make general public comment?
We have a Bridget Washburn.
Hi, good morning. I'm Bridget Washburn. I wanted to thank you for having me up for a minute and mostly to introduce myself. I'm the new Executive Director of Audubon Western Everglades. And I just wanted to thank you all for your past partnerships. We really look forward to collaborating in the future. So just thanks, and started in January, so more to come.
Congratulations on your new position. Buzzy, do we have anyone else signed up
We do at a later time for some later items.
for the agenda, but none for right now?
Yes.
Okay. All right, then that brings us to our first presentation, which is the Collier County Water Quality Report. Chad Ward and Rhonda Watkins.
Morning, Chairwoman Roman and board members. We appreciate the invite here today, and we appreciate your continued interest in our water quality. Just want to say thank you to our entire pollution control team, as this data is a true team effort to put together, from our laboratory to our field sampling team to our outreach and our operations group. Everyone it's really puts a solid effort into making this all happen. So with that, I just wanted to take that moment. Sorry, my name is Chad Ward for the record. I'm the pollution control manager, and I will turn it over to Rhonda for the actual presentation now. Thank you.
Thanks, Chad. Good morning, Chairwoman Roman, board members. For the record, Rhonda Watkins, Collier County Pollution Control. Thank you for letting me come and update you on our water quality monitoring. Most of you are familiar with our work, but there's some new faces on the board. So I wanted to give you a little bit of introduction to pollution control. We have our own in-house NELAC certified laboratory and our own sampling program that's NEFAP certified. It's a lot of acronyms. But what it means is we go through much more oversight and auditing from outside third-party entities to ensure the quality of our data. This is in addition to the following the standards from the DEP for sampling. We monitor both surface water and groundwater throughout the county. We also collect and or analyze samples from other agencies like City Naples, Pelican Bay Services District, and Coastal Zone Management. I don't know if I can do this with my left hand. I'm here today to discuss the surface water quality monitoring. We have 54 sites that we monitor monthly in the freshwater portions of the county. We also monitor 3 sites in Lake Trafford monthly and 9 sites in the Cocohatchee Estuary for coastal zone management. Pollution control ordinance actually designates that we concentrate our efforts in the non-tidal freshwater portions of the county. So if we do any work in the tidal portions, it's usually for someone else, and they're paying us to do that. So talk about my FY23 assessment. Used the water quality standards found in Florida Administrative Code 62-302. Unfortunately, we still don't have any numeric nutrient criteria for nitrogen and phosphorus in our canals. We do have those criteria for all of our estuaries. So in the absence of actual nutrient criteria for our canals, I use the closest standards for the peninsula region of Florida, which is actually used in Lee County by DEP to assess streams there. So any exceedances of nitrogen, phosphorus, or chlorophyll in our canals are not true exceedances. I'm just using those as a screening tool. So the assessment I did is very simplified compared to what DEP does for their impaired waters assessment. Many of the standards used for DEP's assessments are based on annual geometric means and require a certain number of exceedances over a number of years. I'm not trying to repeat their assessment. I'm just trying to give you an indication of what's good or bad in any given year. So as you can see by this table, total nitrogen, dissolved oxygen, and Enterococcus bacteria were exceeded most frequently. But as a collective, the nutrients, including total nitrogen, total phosphorus, and chlorophyll, which is an indicator of algae blooms, had the highest number of exceedances. So the biggest takeaways from water quality in FY23, the good news first, 50% of the watersheds showed decreases in overall exceedances, while the other 50% saw no change at all. There were no copper exceedances at any of our trend sites. We did have one exceedance of a site that we sampled for source tracking, but it wasn't part of our actual trend network. The bad news, 63% showed increases in nutrients, and 45 showed increases in algae blooms. Bacteria levels also went up 60% in the watersheds, and every watershed had at least one water quality exceedance. So this graphic shows the cumulative total of exceedances for every sample in FY23. Sorry, it might be a little bit hard to read from there, but Lake Trafford is again our winner with the most exceedances. Cow Slough and Silver Strand, which are both heavily ag influenced, had the second highest. And we know that at least Silver Strand has an actual contamination source from a fertilizer plant. And I'll talk about that again in a little bit. Since my last presentation, the trend report completed by Janicki Environmental was released. We contract this out because it's way more involved than putting a trend line on a graph. It uses statistics that account for seasonality found in most environmental data. This is also the same analysis that DEP uses for their trend analysis. It's actually adopted by rule that they use this trend analysis. This report is done every 5 years, and it looks at the cumulative long-term trends, and then the short-term trends was like a 5-year period. It is available on our website if you care to look at it. So just a couple highlights from this report. This graphic represents total phosphorus trends. Green indicates an improving trend. Red is a degrading trend. And the arrows you see indicate how steep that trend is. So the larger the arrow indicates a steep, more rapidly changing trend, and the smaller arrows represent a shallow, slower trend. So we had, for total phosphorus, we had increases in Camp Keys, Fakahatchee, Haldeman Creek Lower, Haldeman Creek Upper, and Rookery Bay East. Decreases we saw in Farron River Canal, Gordon River Extension, and Silver Strand. Total nitrogen trends. Increases in Camp Keys, Cocohatchee Inland, Cow Slough, Fakahatchee Strand, Haldeman Creek Upper, Rookery Bay East and West, 10,000 Islands, and Wiggins Bay Outlet. Decreases were seen in Barron River Canal, Gordon River Extension, and Immokalee Basin. Copper, good news. It's going down in almost every WIBID, every watershed. Whoops.
Mhm.
Go back one. The only increase we had was in Rookery Bay West, and that's around that same area where we had that one exceedance when we were source tracking. But we're still getting copper TMDLs, which I'm gonna talk about in a minute. Iron, I wanted to include that one. This is usually an indication of groundwater base flow or groundwater discharge to the canals because our groundwater is naturally high in iron. So when you see iron going up, it's usually because there's groundwater coming into it. So the only places we had increases were Corkscrew Swamp, Cow Slough, and Gordon River Extension. And then we had decreases in Cocohatchee River, Haldeman Creek Lower and Upper, North Golden Gate, and 10,000 Islands. Golden Gate had been on the impairment list for iron for quite some time, so it was good to see that one come off the list for iron. So if you don't know what impairment is, I'm going to talk about that a little bit. So to update you since my last assessment, DEP conducts an impaired waters assessment every 2 years to determine which water bodies are not meeting their designated use, like recreation, fishing, shellfish harvesting, or drinking water. The most recent assessment was done and adopted in August 2024. Since the last assessment, we increased the number of impaired water bodies from 25 to 26, but we decreased the number of parameters from 59 to 44. And then these are the parameters that were most often exceeded for the impairments. Current TMDLs. We received our first TMDL in 2008. That's a long time ago. And then we didn't get another one until 2019. You'd have to ask DEP why, because we certainly had impairments. I should mention that Townsend Canal is the only watershed in Collier County that has a basin management action plan. We are involved in this BMAP, but it's very minimal because the flow is actually towards the Caloosahatchee River. The canal portion doesn't actually exist in Collier County, but the watershed boundaries do. So we have to give routine updates for that BMAP. We also just received 3 copper TMDLs this past December. Merry Christmas to us. Oh, keep hitting the button. And why is copper so bad? We found that most of the copper issues are coming from the use of copper-based herbicides to treat algae blooms. So the root cause of the copper problem is still nutrients causing algae blooms. And as I mentioned, we don't have nutrient criteria, so we can't regulate nutrients. Well, we also can't regulate copper because it's a pesticide, and we are preempted by the Department of Ag on pesticide regulation. Additionally, the 3 TMDLs we have are all in marine water bodies. The copper standard for marine waters is 3.7 micrograms per liter. It's really low. However, on the freshwater side, it's based on a hardness calculation, and it can be as high as 30.5 micrograms per liter. So we could be in compliance on the upstream side of the weir, and the minute it crosses the weir, we're in exceedance. So we are working with DEP on this, but it feels a bit like we're being set up to fail because we can't regulate anything. And we have more TMDLs coming. We will be getting bacteria TMDLs probably this year for 10 more watersheds. And that includes Cocohatchee Inland, Cocohatchee River, Cow Slough, Gordon River Marine, Gordon River Extension, Haldeman Creek Lower, Haldeman Creek Upper, Naples Bay, Oak Creek, and Rock Creek. That's a lot. So in FY23, we conducted 23 source tracking events concentrated on fecal indicator bacteria and nutrients, since those are our biggest water quality issues. Source tracking includes just walking the watershed and looking for issues, inspecting lift stations or septic tanks, and taking additional samples in the watershed to look for hotspots. We did multiple sampling events in the first 4 watersheds that you see there. We didn't do any extra sampling in Silver Strand because we know the source of nutrients is coming from there's a source there coming from the fertilizer plant. DEP is currently working with the property owner to delineate the groundwater contamination from nutrients, but as long as that's still there, it's still a nutrient source. We sampled after rain events that were at least 2 inches in the spring and early summer because we wanted to capture that first flush. We thought this might help us pinpoint specific tributaries coming into these watersheds, but it turns out that bacteria and nutrients were elevated at almost every site both times. What we did find that bacteria levels were staying above the water quality standards for at least 3 days. Could have been more, but that's where we had to cut off our sampling because we had to get back to our other routine monitoring. As I have presented before, we use DNA analysis to track human and other sources like dog or birds. But when we see homeless camps, which cover a lot of the urban areas, we can't use the DNA because it's expensive. If we go out and sample for human DNA and it's there and there's a homeless camp, we don't know, is it from a homeless camp or is it from a sewer system or a septic? And we don't want to go to the expense to have an entire sewer system tightness tested when we got homeless camps right there that could be contributing. We had the highest bacterial levels in Cocohatchee River were found in just one subbasin. And using that DNA analysis, we found human and dog DNA in that basin. We didn't find any human sources, walking through that entire WIBID. There's no septic tanks. There were no homeless camps. We did do dye testing in the sewer system in FY24. We didn't find any leaks. There is a dog park in that subbasin, and we've been told that dog walkers also go through the Cocohatchee Preserve area, and maybe they aren't picking up their pet waste. We don't know. But we struggled trying to find an actual source in this little subbasin. In the Gordon River, we found multiple tributaries were high during one sampling event and then not the next. It's very sporadic, so it makes it difficult for us to find where the issue's coming from. But the problem is that we're running out of tools to do this, and time and money. We've done extensive monitoring using sucralose, which is the artificial sweetener that you get in a diet drink or diet food, but it stays persistent in the wastewater system, and that's what we use to actually trace wastewater. But the problem that we found was that it's everywhere that reuse is. So if we have reuse irrigation, there's sucralose in the surface water and the groundwater. So we can't use that in an urban setting to define if it's, an actual leak or we're actively irrigating with it. We use DNA to determine if bacteria is coming from the humans, birds, or dogs, and it's very expensive. And again, like I mentioned, if there's homeless camps there, it's hard to rule out anything else. I thought at one point isotopes were going to be the best thing since sliced bread. But until I saw a presentation that was a study done in Indian River Lagoon, and they did over 800 isotope samples monthly for like 5 years. And they sampled the actual sources in the watershed. So they weren't going to publications and getting a standard that represents sewer or a standard that represents reuse. They were actually sampling the sources there. And it did not compare to published literature to use their data and come up with an actual answer. So it made me very leery about using isotopes sparingly. You have to really have a robust program of monitoring. And then, of course, this takes time and manpower. And we have multiple tributaries that we're looking in multiple watersheds, sampling under multiple conditions like stormwater events, dry season, or if we get a high hit on any given month, we're going back out and trying to sample. It's very hard to have resources ready to go at any given moment and still keep up with our regular sampling. And of course, the DNA and isotopes are super expensive. So we're still going to do as much tracking as we can. We'll use the analysis tools where we can and try to be as effective with those as we can. Even though the bacteria levels are flashy, we'll continue to monitor and isolate septic or sewage events and then test the integrity of those systems. With the new copper TMDLs, we may start testing private outfalls. Our pollution control ordinance actually gives us permission to go test a private outfall to make sure that you're meeting water quality standards. However, I did a little preliminary search on the South Florida Water Management District permit database, and just in those 3 watersheds, I came up with about 900 permits. So that's a lot. So, we may have to be looking at cutting back some of our trend sites and maybe just focusing on our MS4 sites because it's going to be very busy the next 5 years. And with that, I'll take questions.
Thank you very much for your excellent presentation. I'm sure there'll be questions from the board. Does anyone have any questions? Go ahead, Andy.
Thank you, Rhonda. Thank you, Chad. My question, and I'm thinking at a high level within the boundaries of our responsibility. You covered a lot of what I perceive as problems, but I'm not a scientist, so I'm at a disadvantage with that. But what I'm interested in is what this organization can do to affect positive change. And I'm going to enlist some of the nonprofit organizations, some of which are in the room today, and hopefully the others are online, that probably have a lot of very intelligent people that can come up with some suggestions of how we can work to filter to get the natural kidney system working to remove some of the contaminants. And obviously, if we can get it to figure out where it's coming from, we can deal with that accordingly as well. I don't know if you have the adequate ways to police the contributors to the problem. But that would also be an interesting conversation as to how we can make this, because I think the ultimate result of this is crappy water, in some cases, literally. So,
Not wrong.
so.
So, I mean, we do within, as Chad mentioned, in our department, we have education and outreach. And I will tell you, that's probably what has led to the copper reduction. Part of what we've done since we got the TMDLs, and I know the Basin just got a letter, but we reach out to stakeholders and ask them, please don't use copper. We can't force you not to use it, but we're asking you not to. We'll have a similar letter going out to HOAs. In the past, we had meetings with lake management companies to help them, because a lot of times it's pressure from an HOA that says, we want this done. We want this algae bloom gone. The cheapest way to do it's copper, but that doesn't help us. So we're trying to get lake management companies like, use us, as we'll come and talk to that HOA and say, this is why we don't want to use copper. We know it's cheaper, but there are other things it can use that are probably more effective. And one of those is going to be prevention. So we do a lot of outreach for nutrient prevention. We have our operations section goes out and does illicit discharge inspections. We have fertilizer ordinance violations, things like that. So we have some mechanisms in place, but some of this is kind of out of our hands.
Thank you.
Ms. Smith?
Thank you for your presentation. It's fantastic. I echo what Andy asked, like, what can this organization do? I love that question. But my question was about education and outreach. You might want to circle July 14th. I'm going to be calling you to do some outreach. And it may impact like homeowners or the real estate professionals that could maybe help move us along a little bit. I have a question about some specific things. Why no NNCs or criteria for the canals?
So the methodology they used to come up with nitrogen and phosphorus criteria in the rest of the state was based on going in and looking at benthic critters. So the things that live in the bottom, the things that live in the water column, and to look at a reference site to say, that's a healthy site. We want things to look like that. Now we're going to go look at another canal or another stream, and then based on what we're seeing, we're going to set a standard based on that healthy system. Canals are highly managed. They're highly maintained. You can't go look at benthic things. They get dredged, they get sprayed, one good storm and they all flush out. So the DEP did a South Florida study, canal study for 4 years. And they did it in Broward, they did it in Miami-Dade, and they did it over here. After 4 years, they were like, we don't know what to do. So the only recourse we have right now is to set TMDLs in the estuaries, because all of our estuaries are impaired for nutrients, every single one of them. Set a TMDL for that receiving water body, and then model it up to the watershed to say, this is the amount of reduction in nutrients that we need to have. So, and as far as what the organization can do, I mean, if they have a discharge permit and their permit says when they get it, with the issuance of this permit, you are meeting water quality standards. And that's not always the case. So, I mean, that's the kind of help that we would ask for if we come and say, hey, this permitted discharger, because if they have something from South Florida Water Management District that says they're meeting water quality standards by issuance of a permit, then we're down here going at the county level going, maybe not. And we have data. So I don't know how that works out.
Thank you. It looks like Lake Trafford is an outlier.
Yes. Yes.
We were just out there. So, and they're working, and I'm assuming it's a money thing, financial, education,
You mean as far as the number of
impairments.
exceedances
Yeah.
or?
Yeah, well,
So the issue with Lake Trafford is that, number one, the biggest fix that we could have done to that lake was dredge it. That took a lot of nutrients out of the bottom. However, we still have inputs coming in from the Immokalee Slough and then also from groundwater. There was a study done where they literally took barrels and put them all over the bottom and collected seepage coming up. And they found the highest nitrogen levels were coming from groundwater. Groundwater could be coming from anywhere. So it's really difficult to correct that issue. It's a much bigger picture.
and then why does only Townsend have a BMAP? And
Because it was part of the Caloosahatchee River BMAP. So there was a lot more focus there than there was in Collier County.
there's not a requirement for the others to have that. It's just that it was.
It's up to DEP to decide when and where they issue a BMAP. I don't think there's any legislative standard date. Like if you have a TMDL, you have this many years to do a BMAP. I don't think that's a thing.
Thank you. It's amazing. Your work is great. And are you fully staffed, or is there a staffing?
We are
concerns?
fully staffed.
Okay.
We are. Great. We got one. We're down. Oh yeah, we're down one. We're down one.
Yes, he's like this back there.
We're done one. We're down one. Yeah.
Thank you.
Vice Chair Waters?
Hey, Rhonda, thank you for being here. Question is, with bacteria exceedances, it almost seems like, we kind of get copper pushed down and then something else pops up. Is that something that's been trending up, or is it, I could almost see a way where with all the rain we got last year, higher water tables, you may have more gravity sewer lines that are underwater and able to leach out, and septic tanks not as effective. Curious what the trend has shown there. And then to something else that you said that caught my interest was how it seems like you're sort of adjusting some of these trends based on, rainfall conditions and other things. Was I hearing that right? Or what was that analysis of the
So
statistics
that
you
the
all did?
analysis they use, the seasonal Kindle, and I know you're very familiar with water quality data. And if you looked at it, you'll see a summer pattern and a winter and then summer. So you can't just put a line on that. What that statistic does is normalize that seasonality and takes that into account when it actually does. So it's taking basically a look at every month and then doing a trend by month for every month that you have, and then doing that for the full 5 years or 20 years or whatever it is. The reason I didn't include the bacteria trend was because DEP switched the bacteria indicators that they were using. They went from fecal coliform, which they knew was not representative because it literally can sit and grow in the water. And they went from enterococci in saltwater and then E. coli in freshwater. So we don't have a long-term data set for that yet. But when you look locally, like Rock Creek, yes, definitely 100% exceedance the entire year, every sample. We have done, there's septic tanks up there. We've done extensive boots on the ground. We have found septic tanks. We have found leaking sewer pipes that we've fixed, and it continues to have high. There's a lot of little areas back there with, there's a little turkey farm that was back there, and it's larger lots. So there's, other animal bacteria that could be coming in, but yeah, we are seeing an uptick, certainly in bacteria.
Thank you.
I have a couple questions. I don't see any right now from the other board members. You mentioned at the beginning of your presentation about the levels of validation or oversight for each of your samples. Can you communicate to us and to the public why that is important?
So the certifications that we have, the laboratory it's a national certification, and it's actually overseen by Department of Health in Florida. And they come in every year or so and actually go through our laboratory and audit every system that we do. And the field, the NEFAP, which is the field portion of that, is relatively new, and we're one of the few entities in Florida that actually have that field sampling accreditation. And we go through the same ISO, don't ask me what that acronym is, but it's an ISO audit, and it holds you to a certain standard. I believe Water Management District doesn't even have that certification yet.
So that means that when you go out and pull a sample, you're following a specific
Yes.
protocol each and every time.
Yes.
So that proposes that with doing those procedures, you have a high reliability of what
Yes.
your results are.
Yep.
Okay. So in doing that, it seems like we're backing into the fix of our challenges with water quality, meaning you're pulling a sample, you're finding a high exceedance of a particular, let's say, bacteria, and then there's a chase to find out what's causing it. And you must be doing that with, I'm hearing myself come back through. We have to find that fix. Now, are you doing that with local governments? How do you do that? Let's say you find a high exceedance in a specific area, Collier County Government Center, all right? So how would you go about then
I can give
backing
you a
it?
real, I can give you a real example. So
Okay.
Rock Creek specifically, we kept having high bacteria. We had literally walked that creek multiple times. We found a couple septic tanks, called DOH. DOH comes out and investigates. Yes, that's an issue. Get it fixed. And we did some DNA testing, and we were still getting, there's some human DNA in there. What else is happening? So we go inspect lift stations. Is there a lift station nearby? Yes, there's a lift station. Let's dye test that lift station. And lo and behold, when we put dye in that lift station, and this is the one that is outside the Department of Motor Vehicles, and it went under the canal, the actual pipe. And we put dye in it. The dye came up nice and bright green in the stormwater system on the other side of the creek. And we're like, oh, we got a problem. So yeah, we had to call, and a facilities management was actually responsible for that lift station and piping. And so we got that fixed.
And
So-
from the point that you validated the sample to the point that it was fixed, how long of a period of time was that?
You're probably looking at 9 months.
9 months. So that meant that if there was high bacteria levels, that they continued for that 9-month period until it was fixed.
Yep.
That's one of the challenges I feel, that
Absolutely.
that you're like pulling the sample and finding a problem, and then we're backtracking through all the processes and the stakeholders to get it fixed. I would like to think that there are some processes in place that people look at these systems, on a regular basis before they might create a problem such as that.
Some of those are, it's hard to tell because the system, it seems like it's functioning as it should. And I mean, there was no indication that it wasn't. There was no indication around that lift station that there was an issue.
Mm-hmm.
But we went ahead and dye tested it anyway, and it's a good thing we did.
Yeah, that's a great example. Thank you for sharing that. If we had a nutrient criteria for our canals for nitrogen and phosphorus, what benefit would that create?
Well, we'd probably have a lot more impaired canals for sure. But once you have that impairment, it also opens up the door for funding, 319 funding. It brings more focus. So even though it's a bad thing, it brings more focus into the fix. If we had criteria, like I said, we were, talking about going and sampling an outfall for copper, we could do the same thing for nitrogen and phosphorus and find out where those high areas are, and then work with that entity to try and, get those back down to a reasonable level.
And it's good to hear you address copper in your presentation today. The board had a presentation by DEP on copper, if you'll recall. And in particular, we were trying to look at a way forward with copper, being that it is a different agency, FTAX. I think the city of Naples tried to regulate copper and was passed a ordinance and then was told that they couldn't do it. So we had this presentation by FDEP to kind of get into it a little bit more as a board and to find maybe a way forward. And it was great to hear Assistant Secretary Adam Blaylock, who I had a conversation with. In fact, Lisa Keeler and I both had a meeting with him, that they were working at it last year, and we finally got a TMDL on copper. I think with your outreach and education that you're going to be doing, Wanda, I think that now Rhonda, that we're going to be able to actually fine tune that TMDL and to get it to where it actually works for us. But that was a really positive step. And I want to thank Adam Blaylock and FDEP for working on that, because it just seemed like we were stuck. We couldn't do anything with copper. And it seems to be more of a problem in Southwest Florida, in our area, than it is in other places. So thank you for your work with that too.
Yes, DEP worked with us really closely on development of that TMDL, and we asked them, can you bring DAX to the table, water management to the table, because we feel like our hands are tied and we're going to need help. And so I think at the last time we spoke about it, DAX was actually looking at maybe reformulating the label on copper-based herbicides.
Oh, great.
So that might help us out as well.
That's wonderful.
Yeah.
Are there any other questions for Rhonda? Go ahead, Michelle.
Thank you, Rhonda, for your presentation. And I believe, Lisa, did you tell me that Keep Collier Beautiful is resurrecting itself? And I just wondered if you knew that, Rhonda, and like, are there ways that we could use them to help with these efforts?
I didn't know that, but I can guarantee you there are people in my office that do, and our education and outreach have always worked with Keep Collier Beautiful for anything that we can do. Yeah.
Yeah, let me clarify. So they just now reached out. They haven't started doing anything, but they have expressed interest to restart their program to clean trash out of the canals.
Great. We'll go to public comment. Buzzy, are there any members of the community that would like to speak?
Yes, we do. Brad Cornell of Audubon. Mr. Cornell, you will have 3 minutes for your comments.
Thank you. Brad Cornell with Audubon, Florida and Audubon Western Everglades. Thank you for the opportunity to address you, Madam Chair, board members. On water quality, I want to flag something that Rhonda Watkins had mentioned, and that is the metals impairments for Corkscrew. Corkscrew Swamp Sanctuary has among the highest metal contamination in the county. If you look at that one graph that she showed, I think we're second or third highest on, and it's because of iron. So the iron impairment, as I think Rhonda mentioned, is because of groundwater, and that's irrigation. So this is not a small issue, and we really, really appreciate the collaboration we have on the Corkscrew Watershed Initiative to address hydrology and the impacts of overdrainage. But we can't ignore the water quality implications of conflicting land uses that are putting iron-laden groundwater into Corkscrew Swamp Sanctuary. And so this is an issue for public trust lands and private sanctuaries like ours, or downstream outstanding Florida waters. The Rookery Bay, those kinds of places need some kind of proactive policies, buffers, collaboration with neighbors to avoid this kind of contamination, because it's not fair to the public, it's not fair to us as private landowners to have this kind of pollution coming into our sanctuary or to downstream outstanding Florida waters. Thinking of, for instance, copper and nutrient pollution that's coming off of private lands going into the Rookery Bay and Collier Seminole State Park near Tam Tom, Tomato Road, US 41, that area. the strategy that we're looking for is, can we collaborate with our neighbors, with the water management district, in stemming these? And some of this is outreach, just like we were talking with copper. We want to see the district stand up and say, well, you know, irrigating turf grass, for instance, is a source of nutrient and iron pollution because you're using groundwater irrigation. And so can we accomplish conservation of water and water supply and reduce nutrient and metals contamination through converting lawns to native plants, for instance, and reducing that irrigation demand? But irrigation is a problem, and we're seeing it in the data that Rhonda has shared. So I just want to flag that as a very important issue we need to collaborate on, and we look forward to doing that with you. Thank you.
Thank you.
That is all we have at this time.
Okay, thank you so much, and thank you very much for your presentation. Okay, next up is an update on fisheries research in Rookery Bay with Patrick O'Donnell.
So thank you for having me today. Patrick O'Donnell, environmental specialist with a specialty in fisheries at Rookery Bay. Rookery Bay's waters depend on what flows into them. The estuaries get watershed water, and Rhonda's explanation of what's in the water was outstanding. But I'm going to talk more about the water itself, the fresh water, and how it affects salinity patterns and how those salinity patterns can affect just about everything else in the estuary. I'm going to quickly go through the first slides. They're just introductory. Rookery Bays in Southwest Florida, 110,000 acres. We're hoping to use science to give information to decision makers such as yourself, the best science we can come up with. There's 3 research reserves in Florida and plenty other aquatic reserves all throughout Florida, but we want to talk about Southwest Florida today. About 30 research reserves in the entire country. We do focus on research, education, stewardship, and coastal training, which helps get out the information to the general public. But I'm here to talk about the downstream effects of picayune strand restoration. Most of you know about picayune strand and that it's been going on for quite a while. The restoration started in 2004. When I started in 1998, they said it would start in the year 2000 and take a few years, and then I could do my post-restoration soon after that. 20 plus years later, I'm still at it, but I do hear that it's about to be finished soon. So, you know, a lot of waters come down into one specific part of the estuary in the Union Bay, which is in the picture on that slide. Union Bay just had a small tidal creek prior to, I was told, over 100 miles of canals, 112,000 acres of the watershed draining into this small area. I also study 2 other bay systems. Pumpkin Bay, I guesstimate its watershed at around 10,000 acres. It's been shut off by the canals and the roads over the years, so it has a much smaller watershed, and you'll see salinity patterns later on. Union Bay, highly impacted by the canal system, and Fakahatchee Bay is our most natural estuarine system. It drains the Fakahatchee Strand, and it's going through a natural watershed. So there's wetlands, vegetation to absorb nutrients and other things in the water before it reaches the estuary. And we have our continuous water quality program in all 3 bays, gathering salinity, temperature, pH, conductivity, turbidity every 15 minutes, every day of the year. So this is a picture of the Union Weir right above Port of the Islands. It's the last water control structure which controls the entire system flowing down that canal. All those control structures, they can alter the quantity and the quality of the water, or sorry, the canals alter the quantity and quality, which results in large salinity changes, brings in sediments, other things within the water. But the control structures alter the timing of when that water flows. If you're an organism in the estuary, you're waiting for these environmental cues like a change in salinity to spawn or to mate. So if that arrival of the fresh water in the lower salinities is delayed by water control structures, it can alter the life history of these animals. This salinity graph is taken from the Kendall et al. Paper that was provided to everyone about a month ago. It shows the mean salinities throughout the year in the 3 bay systems and the variation of those salinities. Pumpkin Bay's salinities do not change much. Union Bay's salinities change drastically, and I'll go into another graph after this. With Fakahatchee Bay somewhere in the middle, so more of a Goldilocks scenario where not too much, not too little freshwater flow, but it's the best we have. It's not completely natural, or but it is the best we have, and we use Fakahatchee as our reference or our control site. So back in 2017, in the early wet season, salinity patterns were hypersaline, higher than the Gulf of Mexico. And about June 5th or 6th, the water started coming over that last water control structure. And then within a 2-day period, so 4 low tides later, the salinity in Union Bay was below 5 parts per thousand. So a drastic change in a very short period of time. It can cause things to happen out there that we don't quite understand. Pumpkin Bay salinity, you can see that it stayed very stable, much higher, didn't change much. Fakahatchee Bay had a bit of a change. It got lower, but it didn't reach 0 parts per thousand or fresh water. Union Bay basically dropped to maybe 1 or 2 parts per thousand. And that pattern in Union Bay, the green line, probably persisted for the next 7 or 8 months throughout the wet season. The graph that I added to this very common presentation that I give is the next one, and it is last year's June salinity patterns. Very similar to what we saw back in 2017 and similar to the trends that we've seen ever since I started here. So not as drastic as 2017, but Union Bay, the salinity patterns are still dropping quickly within a few days once that water really starts coming over the weir. And they're fluctuating anywhere from close to 0 back up to 15 parts per thousand, back down at a low tide close to 0. And those changes in salinity happen in about 20 to 25 minutes, maybe 30 at the most. So large change in salinity in a short period of time. I use one word to describe that, and that's stress. Okay, we all know what stress is. It can affect human systems. Every other organism on this planet has stress due to temperature changes, salinity changes, and those changes, if stressful enough, could lead to mortality. And I'll talk about some of that, those salinity stresses and how they affect organisms in the bay. So just take home for the salinity, Union Bay inundated by fresh water, large changes in salinity in the wet season. Pumpkin Bay, very little change. And then all 3 bays in the late dry season have a high, they're very similar. And that'll lead to one of the conclusions from one of the publications that I'll get to later. So with that great range of salinity change in Union Bay, I'll talk about some of the impacts it does have. For my program, I do utilize volunteers, and I like to give a shout out to them. those 1,500 hours is just for my otter trawl program. I double that with my shark assessment program. So without volunteers, I really can't do what I do. So the base of the food web, the plants, okay, they can be affected just by salinity changes. This macroalgae here in this picture, occasionally it washes up on our beaches and it's an eyesore and it starts to smell. We want to get rid of it. It's very important component to the aquatic ecosystem. It provides shelter, provides food, provides oxygen, a filtration device in these base systems. But when you have large salinity changes, the green bars in this graph are always the lowest in the Faki Union Bay. Okay, that's the volume of this algae that I pull up in my otter trawl. The first decade, I was just a fisheries biologist. I didn't know too much about plants. I have become more of an ecologist and found out that everything's interconnected and these plants do make a difference. So the volume of that algae in Faki Union greatly reduced because of just the salinity changes that are happening within Faki Union Bay. There may be other reasons due to nutrient input and other things, but I just focus on the salinity aspects. The other two bays, Fakahatchee and Pumpkin Bay, algae levels are up much higher, significantly higher every year. So there's not the reduction in all that plant material in those bay systems. And how does that relate to fish, which is my expertise? So we pull an otter trawl randomly in bay systems, 4 per day, 4 per bay per month, and collecting all the data on all the fishes. We do collect data on the bycatch, the algae, the sponges, tunicates, and other things. So this graph is very similar to the last one in that it's yearly means and standard errors. Faki Union Bay typically has the lowest species diversity in each of the bay systems when you compare bay versus bay. A higher species diversity is always a good metric to use to describe the health of a system. Okay, the higher the species diversity, the better that system can accommodate more species, and it's just a healthier system. So Faki Union Bay always has the lowest species diversity every year. Well, basically every year. If the error bars don't overlap, that could mean a statistical difference in between those bays. Just looking at a couple different species of fish, the gobies, the code goby prefers higher salinities and algae or vegetation habitat. The clown goby doesn't really care if there's vegetation, it burrows in the mud. And with all the excess stuff that Faki Union Canal brings to Faki Union Bay, the clown goby has more mud habitat to burrow into, and those catch numbers are significantly greater in Faki Union versus the code goby. And opposite in the other two bays, the code gobies seem to dominate because there's more vegetation, and these differences are all significantly different over all the years that I've collected. So just in general about the different species differences, I just talked about the code goby and the clown goby. The green goby is very similar to the clown goby, higher abundances in Faki Union Bay. The naked goby is a close cousin of the code goby. It prefers fresh, lower salinity waters. So I've only caught naked gobies in the Faki Union Bay, never in the higher salinity bays. So these are just really good indicators of how water flows are affecting fish communities downstream. These 4 freshwater species, I found them alive in Faki Union Bay in the wet season. Okay, they were going to die eventually with the salt water, but they just got washed down over the weir and down the canal. And then when we talk about some of the more, let's say, commercially important fish species, pinfish used for bait a lot, they have lower abundances in Faki Union Bay. May not be directly salinity related. It could be due to the lack of algae and hiding places. Pinfish that start out real small need a place to hide. They need small invertebrates to feed on. And if a lot of those small invertebrates aren't around, there's a food source missing. So all these other recreationally important fish, lane snappers, sheepshead, Gulf flounder, gag groupers, they have their lowest abundances in the Faki Union Bay system. Based on the publications that came out in the last few years, all these species that I catch are estuarine residents. They're probably tolerant to a degree of salinity changes. The ones that are less tolerant show the biggest differences in my data set. So overall, the species that are there aren't expected to change much, but the relative numbers of those species should change with the complete restoration of picayune. And Matt Kendall's conclusion about that high salinity at the end of the dry season basically resets the system. It's still a functioning estuary. It doesn't turn into a freshwater dominated system that he originally thought when he first met me. So with restoration in Faki Union, we should hopefully see more algae, more sponges, more tunicates, the organisms that support everything else in the food web. Okay, better habitat, better food sources, which allows invertebrates to survive and the small fishes that grow into large fishes over time. And hopefully we see an increase in the species diversity, higher species richness in Faki Union Bay over time. My other program, which started a little bit after the trawl program, looks at juvenile sharks using the estuary as a nursery. Okay, we use a gill net and long lines to collect these juvenile sharks, and occasionally we get sawfish, which I'll talk about towards the end. Salinity is a major driving factor to what sharks can be where within the estuary. Bull sharks can tolerate all salinities. Doesn't matter what the salinity is, they could be there. But the other sharks have smaller tolerances. Overall, bull sharks and bonnetheads are over 80% of my total catch. So they dominate the system, but we do get a fair number of lemon and blacktip sharks, a few nurse sharks over time, even less great hammerheads and scalloped, and Atlantic sharp-nosed sharks. So I don't focus on those species as much. With our gear, we're able to capture sharks. It used to be one evening a month in each bay system. I have switched to daytime this past year to see if juvenile sharks are just as active and abundant during the daytime periods. After 2 or 3 years, if my catch rates are similar, I will continue with the daytime sampling post-restoration. If they are significantly different, I will go back to the evening sampling to be more consistent and have a more comparable data set pre and post. I bring the sharks in, put them in. One of my best ideas ever was my 5-foot kiddie pool in the back of the boat, where they can actually swim around and stay alive. They have to keep moving to get enough oxygen across their gills. So this was my best idea. Well, $8 kiddie pool 20 years ago. Now they're about 15. I put a plastic dart tag in them. I have moved on to some acoustic telemetry data, which won't be mentioned in this talk, but we are gathering more information on small-scale movements of sharks within the estuary. We take length measurements on these sharks, 4 different ones. And the best 2 are, it's not the total length, which you would use for a game fish. They do stretch total. But if a shark loses its tail to another shark, I no longer have total length. So I use pre-caudal and fork length measurements. These are the general salinity ranges that sharks can tolerate. Bull sharks, it doesn't matter. Any salinity, I can get a bull shark in. Bonnetheads and lemons are less tolerant to the lower salinities. 15 parts per thousand and higher is their range. And the blacktips, nurse sharks, the hammerheads, they cannot tolerate much below 25 parts per thousand. So depending on the salinity patterns, that really determines which sharks might be present in those waters. So these are mean and standard errors of shark catches divided by 2 different salinity ranges. This graph is above 25 parts per thousand, and there's a general consensus most sharks can tolerate that. The next graph is similar in nature, but it is any salinity that is below 25 parts per thousand. Drastic differences between dry season in this graph and wet season. So wet season comes, bull sharks take over pretty much everywhere. Bonnetheads are pretty much forced out of the Union Bay system and over towards Fakahatchee and Pumpkin Bays. Lemon sharks, same thing. They just don't show up in Union in the lower salinity wet season. Blacktips never in Union in the wet season. So just based on salinity pattern and the actual fresh water coming in, it can manipulate shark ranges within the estuary. Any questions on these 2 graphs while I'm on them? Okay. The small tooth sawfish. So back to the bull sharks, they're what we call euryhaline. They can tolerate wide salinity ranges. The sawfish is kind of the same. They use the estuary as a nursery. They are endangered and they are part of my catches out there, so I do mention them. The upper right picture is the very first one I ever caught. I didn't have the kiddie pool at the time. I worked it up quickly. That is a less than 1-year-old sawfish, less than 1 meter long. And the picture upper left is a 1-year-old. After the first year, they are 5 feet long, approximately. The 2 on the bottom, that is a 2-year-old sawfish. And their growth rate is very quick. And a lot of the data I've collected has gone in with Mote Marine Lab and Charlotte Harbor sawfish biologists, which rewrote the growth patterns of the sawfish. And this was maybe 10 years ago. So little is known about sawfish and even some of the shark species, which we're trying to figure out how they're reacting in the nursery just based on salinity patterns from Picayune strand. Second best idea ever was my chainsaw cover to protect us from their rostral teeth. Only took me about 15 years and had an extra one in my garage, but this is our safety protocol when we do get sawfish, and especially during release. We have to release them from the restraints, and this is great to protect us from them. So in general, I catch a lot of 1- and 2-year-old sawfish. I have caught a 15-footer and 12-footer that did not come into the boat. Those were mature, and but they were only there in the pupping season. So normally it's just the small sawfish. Again, they are more euryhaline and able to withstand large salinity patterns. I did catch quite a few in September of, I forget the year, in 5 to 10 parts per thousand. So they're not as affected by the flow coming out the canal. But as an endangered species, you know, it's good to know that they still can survive there. My best graph is coming up, I think, next. Yeah, this is it. So this is 24 years or so of sawfish data, and each line, they're just sums on the left. So a short line up to 1 is just a single catch in that month of that year. And if it goes up to 4 or 7, that's the number I caught within that month. So the first decade of the study, I captured sawfish 26 times. The last decade, I've caught 88 sawfish. But the numbers get even better. Because of those 26, 7 were recaptures, meaning only 19 individuals were caught in the first decade. Only 4 out of the 88 were recaptured. So there's a 4-fold increase in the number of sawfish I've caught this past decade versus the first decade, which is great news for sawfish. The protections they've had over time have allowed maybe more young to survive to adulthood, better breeding success, and I'm catching more of them in the estuary. Bad news for me is they're the most dangerous thing out there, and it's a lot of work and a lot of stress to work with sawfish, but it's great news that they are doing much better over time. So in summary of this shark program, they're directly impacted by salinity patterns, depending on their species. And hopefully this restoration will lessen that salinity stress so that more sharks can be spread out across the estuary, more fish in general. Maybe those big differences in catch rates will even out over time as the salinity stress is reduced. And sawfish are doing much better over the years. So with Picking strand restoration almost nearing completion, the quality of the water is probably the most important. You know, what are the salinity patterns like? With less water coming down through the canal, we should see less drastic changes in salinity, which should help the vegetation continue to propagate through the wet season. Vegetation leads to better invert communities, which leads to the primary consumers, the small fishes, the low juveniles trying to survive, which goes all the way up the food web to your top predators, the sharks, sawfish, tarpon, snook, all these great fish that people like to catch. So if we get the water right, the fish communities should come back to a more even catch abundance level across the estuary, and it should be a benefit overall. I always acknowledge funding for the shark program. Shark Foundation is interested in shark conservation, education on a global scale. And my volunteers, who I can't get the work done without them. And they have provided hundreds, at least 100,000 hours since I started over the years. Rookery Bay staff also do their part in allowing the research to continue. And I believe the next time that Rookery Bay might present here, I think it should be on our water quality. That's going to be the first thing that changes with the end of the restoration program. And then maybe 5-10 years after that, I could come back, because there's going to be a lag time for fishes to react to the changes. It's going to take the ecosystem to recover first. Fish and other things might take a little bit more time. That's all I've got. I welcome any questions.
All right, Patrick, thank you so much for your excellent presentation. Do any of the board members have questions? I have a couple of questions. You mentioned that the bull shark right now is predominant because of the salinity levels. Is there a better type of shark to see in the ecosystem, one over the other? So it's not bad that bull sharks are predominant.
I doubt it. But because the others are excluded from just a small area of the estuary, it gives them the advantage. Because they can tolerate low salinities, they have the advantage already. They can go up into freshwater sources anytime they want. It's a competitive world out there in the water. So when the freshwater changes come with picking strand restoration, I may see some other sharks showing up in Fact Union over time. All sharks are basically top of the food web, and they're gonna make the other fish communities, invert communities, better and healthier over time. But I don't think that the lack of the other sharks has a true effect on the estuary because the bull sharks are still there.
And is the sawtooth, or I should say the sawfish, is that natural to that environment, and the increasing numbers is a good thing?
It's a very good thing. So worldwide, I believe Southwest Florida has the greatest numbers of sawfish in existence right now. Southwest Florida has been this semi-protected area. 10,000 islands, not an easy place to get around in. They've been left alone. The gillnet ban probably did help reduce sawfish mortality back in 1995. That was put into place. So since then, I believe that's helping increase the number of sawfish using the estuaries as nurseries. And from here to Charlotte Harbor, we record, I think, the most sawfish worldwide. They do serve their role in the ecosystem as a predator and controlling other species. But it's a very good thing that I'm seeing the numbers that I'm seeing with sawfish.
That's good to hear. You mentioned water quality. Is Rookery Bay sampling in the bay's water quality? Is that what you're referring to, or?
Yeah, we do some nutrient sampling. I haven't really looked at those graphs yet, but because I focus mainly on salinity. We collect salinity patterns in all three of those bays, plus the Blackwater River system and Henderson Creek system every 15 minutes, every day of the year. So it's an incredible data set. Everything in the water depends on the water itself. So I've been asking to get our data set analyzed for years now because my biological data sets depend on the water. So once we get that fully understood, we'll have a better understanding what's happening in the water and how that's affecting biological species.
And if that data set could be analyzed, then we could see better the trend going forward with after Picayune strand restoration based upon historical salinity levels, right? That would be
historical as of the last 25 years.
Yeah, whatever history we have, that'd be good. And I wanted to recognize Jeff Carter, who's the director of Rookery Bay National Estuarine Research Reserve, who's with us today as well in the audience. Are there any public comments or public commenters there, Buzzy?
Not at this time.
I want to mention that I first met Patrick in 2002 when I first moved to Southwest Florida. As a volunteer on one of his trawls that was the coldest February day that I'd ever explained, and nothing like being wet and cold. And I've also participated in his shark research, and I'm glad to hear you switch to day. That's got to be a lot nicer than night with mosquitoes and everything else. But I wanted to offer the opportunity for the board members to participate maybe in one of as a volunteer with Patrick to get an up close and personal experience with what our waters really hold. I think it's magical to pull up a trawl net and to see the diversity of life that lives in and around our area. So I would offer that to you, and I'm sure Patrick wouldn't mind having the extra set of hands if you've got the time to participate.
Everyone that's interested is welcome.
Thank-
RookeryBay.org, register as a volunteer and get on my list.
That's great, Patrick. And I don't see any, oh, Ms. Smith, go ahead.
Mine's not really a question. Well, I guess it is. I was intrigued by the goby fishes because nobody really eats them, right? They're just an indicator for you for the ecosystem and the health of the, I guess, pollution and water quality and just in general, correct?
Yeah, so I could probably use lane snappers as well as an indicator of their abundance changes due to various reasons, salinity changes, lack of algae.
Got it.
That whole list on the left side of that table were all those fish affected by changes in water flows due to the canal system.
Interesting.
And that's been 50 years of changes. And this restoration is a great thing. It will get finished soon and create less stress on the organisms that are trying to survive in the nursery, the habitat that they're growing up in. And it's overall, the ecosystem will benefit from picking strand restoration.
Very interesting. I'd like to sign up for those, not the shark side of it. Maybe the pigfish. I'd like to catch a pigfish.
Yeah, there you
But
go.
you do a great job. Very interesting.
Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. McLeod.
I just had a question for you, Patrick. Thank you for your presentation. You had mentioned you had a slide on the microalgae that washes up to shore, but that it's a very good thing, even though it's unsightly and has a bad smell with it.
Yeah.
What do we do with it? What should we do with that if it's supposed to be good?
If you push it back into the surf zone, it's just going to wash back up. Compost it. Use it as a fertilizer. It will have salt residue on it. So I don't know if that can help, compost it, or if there's composting facilities. I know the dump has a good one. But yeah, if removing it off the beach is not affecting, the aquatic ecosystem. So I would say compost it.
Okay. Perhaps the city does that already because they rake the beaches
And
on
they
a
have to
regular
put it
basis.
somewhere,
Yeah,
yeah.
exactly. Okay, thank you.
I don't see any other questions, Patrick. Thank you for your being here today, and thank you for the excellent work that you do. And Jeff, if there's a way that we can partner on things going forward with this historical data that you have, please reach out. All right,
Might
all
be
right.
back in 5 to 10 years then.
Yeah, I may not be here. But that's okay. One of these folks will. Yes, he's going to be with you another 10 years. Thank you so much. All right, that brings us to the next item on our discussion agenda, which is restoration project in the Western Everglades with Jen Reynolds from the district headquarters. Welcome.
Thank you very much for the opportunity to present this item to you this afternoon. I'm the Director of Ecosystem Restoration at the South Florida Water Management District. That means that we have planning, policy, and real estate under my division. And so as we look at how do we get these projects moving and into construction, that's the area that my division handles. And so before jumping into the projects, I have to figure out how this stuff works. All right. Do I click slides here? Okay, great. Sorry. Before jumping into the projects, I just wanted to give a little bit of context of like, how did we get here? What are we doing here? What does Everglades restoration mean? And so why is Everglades restoration important? As people moved to Florida, we squeezed the Everglades. And so we took all of the Everglades and people started living in areas, and we drained a bunch of it for agriculture and for houses and for roads and for all the things that make living in Florida possible. And so we're talking about a huge area, over 3 million acres, if you include everything that's part of the Everglades. And Western Everglades in this part that we're talking about now, it's over 1.5 million acres, right, that we're talking about. And so what does that mean when you think about species and water? Well, it means that all that water that fell from the sky and landed on the landscape has to go somewhere. And so in the built environment, It means it gets collected in canals and shunted very quickly to the coast. Historically, it landed on more natural areas, sat there for a while, and slowly made its way to the coast. And so Everglades restoration is important, not just for those habitats that we've lost, right? Some of those we aren't getting back. We're not moving 9 million people out of South Florida. But for the habitat that's left, it needs that water. And the ocean spaces, all of our estuaries, still need all that water. But as was really obvious from Patrick's presentation, it doesn't need it in point source discharges of huge freshwater slugs. So what do we do about that? It means that we've got to store this freshwater and meter it out in a way that the estuary can receive it, but in a way that mimics that historical, gradual influx of that freshwater. And so really that's what Everglades restoration is about. And so we talk about it using QQTD, the quantity, the quality, the timing, and distribution of fresh water that falls from the sky in the form of rainfall, collects on the landscape, and then needs to go to our coastlines in a way that is mimicking the historical ecosystem functions of the Everglades. And so those three graphics on this slide kind of talk about what did historically the Everglades look like, then what have we done to the Everglades and how is it moving through the system today and over the past 40 or 50 years? And then what do we think that's going to look like in the future? We know it's not going to look like the first picture, right? Because we have people who live in those spaces. But instead, how can we use storage, treatment, and then improved distribution in order to mimic those historic ecosystem functions? And Everglades restoration sort of limped along. In 2000, there was a great partnership between the state of Florida and the federal government to bring Everglades restoration to a reality and figure out how do we undo some of the damage that we've been doing since the 1880s all the way through 2000 and figure out how do we move forward from that. And so this great partnership happened in 2000, but then it sort of limped along because it required a lot of funding. It required some time getting the framework in place. How do we do all this? We're figuring it out. And then when Governor DeSantis took office, he really challenged our organization, Florida Department of Environmental Protection, to come together with the federal government and start making this happen faster. There was broad support from the Florida legislature, as well as from the Congress, in order to fund Everglades restoration. And so in 2019, we really started putting the pedal to the metal and started, working on more than one or two projects at a time and started funding and planning, designing, and constructing so many more projects. And that support has really continued. And so I'm going to talk today about Western Everglades projects, but I'm going to touch on a few others. And so some of the ones that you've seen in the news and coming to fruition have been all around the lake. So storage north of the lake, LOCAR was just authorized in the Water Resources Development Act, as well as Western Everglades that we're going to talk about in a moment. Indian River Lagoon South projects on the east side of the lake that are helping the St. Lucie estuary. We've been working on projects that are associated with Biscayne Bay coastal wetlands. Those projects have been in the works. And so now we really need to talk about Central Everglades. That's the Central Everglades Planning Project. I'm going to talk about that on my next slide and give you a little bit about that. And then all these Western Everglades projects that really fit in on how we make progress connecting all of these ecosystems. And so I'm going to come back to this slide a few times. This is a map that I think is helpful to talk about Western Everglades because it really kind of shows you where things fit in context. Again, this is zoomed in though, right? You don't even have Lake Okeechobee on here or any of the stuff between Lake Okeechobee and what I would call the southwestern Everglades. So here you've got Tamiami Trail, right? Tamiami Trail, US 41. This part, starting with sort of Chrome Avenue and Miami-Dade, going across the Water Conservation Area 3, 40-mile bend here, right? And then the Western Everglades associated with Big Cypress National Preserve. You've got Rookery Bay and all these great places here on the coast. And so this is a huge space, right, that we're talking about. And it really is important as we think about, and we're going to talk, I'm going to kind of walk you through Everglades restoration projects from Chrome Avenue moving west. Oh, wow. My cursor didn't like that. Let me move that over a little. And so let's start over here on the western side. So one of the first projects that we started working on was uncorking the Tamiami Trail. You've heard that maybe talked about. There's a project that was a partnership between the Florida Department of Transportation and Department of Interior and Everglades National Park. And that was to build bridges on the far western end of Tamiami Trail where Everglades National Park starts. And the purpose of that project was to allow flow to come from Water Conservation Area 3 into the canal that's on the north side of Tamiami Trail, then go under bridges into Northeast Shark River Slough of the park. This was one of the first restoration projects that helps us to eliminate that barrier between the Central Everglades and the Southern Everglades and get water into Everglades National Park and onto Florida Bay. And so that project has been under construction for some time. This last phase, so the first bridge was completed a number of years ago, has been working. We're seeing additional deliveries, but this second phase was really important to increase that flow. That first phase was like a mile long. This is additional bridging, over 4 additional miles of conveyance that helps to increase the flows into Everglades National Park. And this project will be complete next year. And so this is a great step forward and helps to show how many partners we have in this process, right? It's not just the water management, the South Florida Water Management District and the Corps of Engineers, but there are lots of other partners that are working with us to make Everglades restoration happen. And so then moving a little bit farther to the west, right? So we started on the far east side and moving a little bit farther west. So as you look at these additional areas, so this is Tamiami Trail down here, right? So Central Everglades Planning Project is a 4-phase project. This is a huge project that incorporates all of the Central Everglades. What do I mean by the Central Everglades? If you take Lake Okeechobee and go south 100 miles, it takes water 100 miles to get to the bay. Central Everglades is the construction project in 4 phases that helps that water move south. So it includes the EAA reservoir. Oh, actually I have graphics. It includes the first phase, the EAA phase. That includes the EAA reservoir, the stormwater treatment area, the conveyance necessary to increase water flows from the lake into the storage here. The next phase is the north, SEP North phase. That allows us to redistribute that stored water across the entire northern boundary of Water Conservation Area 3A. The reason that's important is because we have rookeries on the northern end of the water conservation area that get dried out. We have peat fires, we have loss of habitat for those wading birds. This will allow water to be continuously supplied to that north end so that then it can sheet flow across the entire expanse of Water Conservation Area 3A. Then we have SEP South. This opens up the Tamiami Trail. So in addition to the bridges, then this creates the flowway, and all those X's that you see on this map, that's removing levees, removing the channeling of water, and creating a sheet flow effect in what's called the Blue Shanty Flowway. And the Blue Shanty Flowway is the historic connection between Water Conservation Area 3 and Everglades National Park. And it will allow us to deliver millions more gallons of water regularly through this flowway and into Everglades National Park and onto Florida Bay. And then the last piece of Central Everglades project is new water. And the reason that this is important is this was a seepage barrier that's been completed that helps protect the built environment in Miami-Dade from the hydrated environment in Everglades National Park. And so keeping the water in the park and off of the built environment is also really important as we look at how do we do Everglades restoration. So back to our map. So now we've talked about this part here, right? Now we've talked about Central Everglades connecting this area. Here's the Blue Shanty Flowway. You can see that historic flow pattern into Northeast Shark River Slough. And so then the next thing we're going to talk about is this whole area here. This is Western Everglades. And so the Western Everglades Restoration Project was just authorized by Congress in the December Water Resources Development Act. So now we can move forward full steam ahead with designing and constructing the features associated with this project. But it's a really big project area. So that black outline on this map is the entire study area for the Western Everglades Restoration Project. This includes 4 different areas that we're constructing projects in, and I'm going to talk a little bit about how those connect together on the subsequent slides. But where we started with Western Everglades is even before this project was authorized, the South Florida Water Management District moved out on some features that were part of the plan. And we took the risk of starting the design and construction on some of those features to reconnect Water Conservation Area 3 with Big Cypress National Preserve. And the reason that we did that is because a key purpose of the Western Everglades Restoration Project is to equalize those water flows and those water levels between Water Conservation Area 3A, where historically we've been seeing dryouts in the north and flooding in the south. The loss of tree islands, problems with all of the animals that live there, and the water levels being too high because the water is flowing to the south and not having enough outlets. At the same time, we were seeing wildfires in Big Cypress National Preserve because there wasn't enough of that equalization of the water because of the levees that are in place, impounding the water on the eastern side of that levee in the conservation area, starving the Big Cypress of some of those flows, as well as preventing flows into Lossman's Slough. Lossman's Slough is a really important and not often enough talked about slough that runs from Big Cypress National Preserve into Everglades National Park. And after Northeast Shark River Slough that we just talked about in the Central Everglades, Lossman's Slough is the second most important and largest delivery of water into Everglades National Park. And it's on that western side, and it connects between Water Conservation Area 3A through the Western Everglades, Big Cypress National Preserve, and into Everglades National Park, providing those freshwater flows into our estuaries on the western side of Everglades National Park. Super important. And so we moved out on 3 culverts between Water Conservation Area 3A and Big Cypress National Preserve through what's called the L28 levee. And so we moved out on that construction. Here's a picture of that construction that's ongoing. We started that construction last April and we're scheduled to be complete in 2027. At the same time, though, that water is moving. We're letting it move into the western part, right, into Big Cypress National Preserve. But there's some roads there, and you'll see it again when we go back to the map. But there's some roads there that we wanted to make sure didn't become barriers, because now you just have a new impoundment area and new high water and new places that is incompatible with restoration. And so at the same time as we're working on the construction here, we also are designing and moving into construction with additional culverts along 11 Mile Road and Loop Road, as well as additional culverts on US 41 to make sure that as that water equalizes, it has some place to go and can move into Lossman Slough and some of those other historic connections. In conjunction with that equalization between Water Conservation Area 3 and Big Cypress National Preserve, as you move farther north into the Western Everglades area, the feeder canal basins are an important part of how we get the water right in Western Everglades. This is a very large agricultural area, and the water drains into the West Feeder Canal and then into Water Conservation Area 3A. Also here is the Seminole Reservation, and their natural areas have been overdrained and need some of those flows to rehydrate their areas. That also is one of the objectives of the Western Everglades Restoration Project. But in order to connect these areas and remove what's called the triangle area, I'm going to go back to the map for a second and show you that. So rehydrating these natural areas in the Seminole Reservation and reconnecting these areas. So right now water drains high speed down this area and creates an imbalance of the plant community in this area, bringing a lot of nutrients and freshwater flows. So there's like this huge invasive species and willow conglomerate that happens at this triangle area. So another one of the goals of Western Everglades is to backfill these canals so that we create a more natural environment in this part of Water Conservation Area 3A that's very important to the Miccosukee tribe, rehydrate these natural areas in the Seminole Reservation, important to the Seminole tribe, and make sure that as we look at these feeder canal basins, that we also take care of the private landowners in this area and make sure that we don't impact their livelihoods and the habitats that are really important here, which, oh, by the way, as you know from your experience with Picayune Strand, this is just an extension of panther habitat. And so making sure that we keep this right for panthers is also important. So a great balance of really hard challenges that we've got to get right. So what are we doing as we're looking at how we figure that out? We have to look at water quality as well as water quantity, timing, and distribution, right? QQTD. And so in the feeder canal basin, what we've done is we've undertaken a water quality sampling program, and we're working with landowners in these basins in order to evaluate how the water moves, what we can do together to improve water quality, and also improve the water distribution. And so we're looking at different projects and different sampling, making sure we understand how the water works as we figure out what do we do with these red canals, and they're just red for ease of visualization on this slide. But we're looking at, as an example, one option is where that squiggly line is, making a connection that helps improve drainage for these landowners, also helps us address the water quality, and the water quantity so that we're redistributing that water potentially to a storage area that is somewhere on the eastern side of this map. And so we're working on that with the landowners in this basin as part of our water quality program that supports the Western Everglades Restoration Project. And so we've done a bunch of survey work. We're doing canal cross sections, great coordination with both tribes and the landowners in this area, and looking at all of the different structures associated with these private lands. We also have improved our model, incorporating input from those landowners and looking at the flow paths, particularly during high water events, during storm events and large rainfall events, to make sure that we're understanding both the average annual, but also how large rainfall events impact flows in these areas as we incorporate these project features into the Western Everglades. And so then in this area, one other thing, you saw it on a previous slide. I'm going to go back to this map for just a moment. You can see in this area, so the next thing I'm going to talk about is this C139 flow equalization basin. So here's our stormwater treatment area 5-6, part of restoration strategies, how we make sure that the water is clean for the Everglades to receive it. Our last major project in that program was our C139 flow equalization basin. This is a shallow storage area associated with that stormwater treatment area 5-6. This helps us capture water out of the C139 basin, store it and meter it out into that stormwater treatment area, allowing us to maximize the nutrient uptake of that plant community so that we can deliver clean water to the Everglades, particularly to Water Conservation Area 3A. And so that was just completed in November. So there's a lot of construction going on in your area. I know you see it as you're driving along US 41 and also along I-75. You can see all these big projects underway. And so the next thing I want to mention is as you continue going west, so here is State Road 29, and this is US 41. So all of these little diamonds are just survey points as we talk about this. But we are collaborating with the Florida Department of Transportation on how do we make US 41 more transparent to water. It, just like on the national park side of where US 41 connects and is acting as a barrier to flow, that's happening on the western side as well. And so how do we recreate that historic flow pattern that you can see on this map? You can see how the water wants to flow toward the coast, not just in a few areas, but all across where where Tamiami Trail has bisected all of these ecosystems. And so we're working with the Department of Transportation in order to figure out how, as we move forward through time, how can we bring some short-term hydrologic connection between the north side of the trail and the south side of the trail. And so about 6 months ago, we started working on this. And just in this last budget document, the Department of Transportation received $150 million to explore this, which is a huge sum of money. We thought we were working with like 10 or 12 million. And so we were identifying a few areas that we could do with a smaller amount of money. But now the Department of Transportation has even additional funding in order to explore this. And so it's a really exciting time. And so this is our first effort. We identified what is the red circle on this slide, and it's Roman numeral 4. And based on our modeling data and our analysis of hydrology, we were recommending this area as the first place to look at putting a bridge in order to increase the flow from one side of the trail to the other side of the trail. And so we are moving forward with DOT on that. And we are looking at additional proposed bridging areas as well. I don't have a great timeline for you just yet on how this is moving forward, but we have a meeting next week with DOT to start laying out a schedule that moves us into a more deliberate timeline. And so I look forward to being able to come back, hopefully with my partner from DOT, and we can tell you a little bit more about how this is going to progress in the coming months. And so we're excited about this opportunity. It's really important looking at both terrestrial and aquatic wildlife, making the trail transparent to them, as well as making it transparent to water and reconnecting hydrologically all of these habitats. Along with that, last year, the South Florida Water Management District moved out on a land acquisition project that was supported by the legislature. The legislature directed us to acquire what was called the Green Heart of the Everglades project. And this is a huge land acquisition of over 11,000 acres right here in your neck of the woods. And so this connected a lot of what were already public lands, really connecting the big Cypress National Preserve with Fakahatchee Strand, Everglades National Park, and 10,000 Islands. And so this acquisition has already occurred. And so I think it's at your very next meeting that Rory will be here to talk to you about this project and about the recreational opportunities that this will bring to your communities. And so I stole one of his slides that he's going to talk to you more about these opportunities that are coming to your backyard through the interim land management plan. And so he'll give you a whole briefing on that. I think it's at your next meeting. And of course, I couldn't end a presentation about Western Everglades restoration without talking about Picayune Strand. And so these are pictures. Thank you, Colonel Roman, for providing some of these pictures from your recent trip out to Picayune Strand just last week. But this project is coming to completion. And so we are really looking forward to realizing the benefits. We've already started seeing some of these benefits with Picayune Strand. And I know you had a full briefing on this at your last meeting from Steve Basin from the Corps, where he gave you an update on how this project is progressing, and looking forward to this project being complete this calendar year. And so these are just some pictures that highlight how we're backfilling these canals. So instead of point source discharges into the estuaries, we will have a spread out, hydrologically sound way of delivering water to our ocean so that it will benefit not just the land environment and these habitats that are on our land that we can see that we're restoring, but it also helps to benefit those estuarine environments that are along our coastlines. And so super excited to see that come to fruition. So what does this all mean, right? Are we like making a difference? We've been working at this for 25 years. What's happening? So I wanted to include just a little bit about, is it working? And I'm happy to report that it is. And so how do we know that? So I know these pictures are kind of small, but here's a 20-year record of what hydration looks like in the Everglades. And in these circles that are labeled 1 and 2, this is Northeast Shark River Slough in Everglades National Park, and here's Taylor Slough. And then here are what those same sloughs look like in 2022, 2023, and 2024. You'll see that these sloughs are very dried out in our 20-year history, in the recent record, right? And that's because we were holding all the water up here and sending it from Lake Okeechobee out east and out west. And we weren't allowing the river of grass to collect that water and move it south to the bay. But with the investments that we're making, you're starting to see a difference. Now, rainfall matters. So not all of this is solely Everglades restoration. Some of this is because when rainfall happens in the right places, it helps us be able to leverage the infrastructure that we have in place. But before this infrastructure, Tamiami Trail and the way we were operating the system prevented us from being able to send this water to Everglades National Park and onto Florida Bay. And you can see that these investments are making a difference. And you can see that we're starting to have a huge difference in these water flows, keeping these sloughs wet even at the end of the dry season. It's a huge difference and really impressive. But you're also seeing it in Florida Bay. And so before the investments, and what do I mean by investments? I mean $1 billion worth of infrastructure along Tamiami Trail, right? That's what I'm talking about. And then during dry season salinities, with those additional deliveries, you're starting to see the difference here in those salinity numbers in Florida Bay, as well as the sloughs in Everglades National Park. You'll notice also that in the Western Everglades, we don't have that much improvement yet. And that's where those Western Everglades projects that I just talked about are really going to make a difference. And we're going to start seeing those improvements in these areas as well, to include Lossman Slough, which is in this vicinity here. And so you can see here some of those improvements in Lossman Slough. A little bit of that is some of the improved culverts along Tamiami Trail. Most of that was because Mother Nature helped us out, and we had some good rainfall events here on the southwestern coast of Florida in this past year. And so with that, I will end with a great picture of the canal plugging at Miller Canal and Picayune Strand, and I'd be happy to take your questions.
Thank you, Jen. I really appreciate your presentation. I asked Jen to present to the board in order for us to have a better appreciation for what's going on in our backyard. Many of you have visited the Big Cypress Preserve. You also have been back and forth to Miami on 41. So I thought it might be helpful if you had a good overview of what some of the things are that are going on. Are there any board member questions for Jen? Go ahead, Andy.
I have a number of questions.
You gotta use your mic.
Thank you. That would help. It's an area I have a personal interest in. I'll be in Lossman's fishing about 7 o'clock tomorrow. I think Ranger and I will be arriving, and I got room on the boat if anybody wants to come along. I don't have anybody planned to join me besides Ranger. So it's an area I've known for, I began fishing there in the late 90s, and the change in the ecosystem has been pretty ugly, although improving, as you point out, in the last few years. My concerns are a number of things. One, in terms of the funding for these various projects, as to where we stand on that, and what risk do we have with budget cutbacks at the, I'm more concerned at the federal level today. I think we all are. Where's the money going to come from? Let's start with that issue.
Yeah, I mean, definitely a policy question, right? So the On the state side, the governor has not wavered in his support for Everglades restoration. We have 805 million in this year's budget for Everglades restoration. And
lot of
so that's a great number. And I think we're on track to be able to continue moving forward with the projects that we've committed to and the schedules that we've laid out. On the federal side, we haven't seen a lack of support, either from Congress or from the administration on Everglades restoration. We've heard only support
Okay,
for those things as of yet. So I don't see any change in that trajectory, at least in the near term.
okay. And the time frame, when are we going to start seeing these various projects raising 41, near 29? Am I going to see any detour signs on this weekend?
You're not going to see them this weekend, but we are already doing the work, as I mentioned, on where the L28 is. So that's sort of closer to 40 Mile Bend, that area.
Okay.
You've seen that construction. That's going to continue. And in fact, between there and Miami-Dade, you're going to see more construction as we work on some of the South projects.
Okay,
From there this way, which is more of those projects that we're doing with DOT. Those are probably more, those need to go through some design work.
okay.
So it's probably another 3 years before you see that construction
Hurry up.
really taking hold. And you should see the construction ending associated with Picayune Strand. And
Okay.
so that project has been, I think that detour is over on the Picayune Strand culverts. I didn't drive that way today.
And Jen, I don't know if you have any influence over the design or whether you know people that do. The one thing that I through the Shark Valley area, that I would have liked to have seen the opportunity for visitors to stop and see water flow underneath the bridge. Opportunities like that on this project, I think would really be helpful, so the taxpayers can stop and see where their dollars are going. I don't know if there is any areas to do that through the Shark Valley area, and I'm just not aware of them, which is certainly possible.
Yeah, that's a great point. And so I know that there's one area where we did the Old Tamiami Trail removal.
Mm-hmm.
There is a portion of that was retained in order to create a historic, what do you call that? A site for visitors so that they could understand what had happened, a historical marker.
Well, if there's a spot, if they could educate me on that, it'd be neat. So.
Okay, yeah, I don't think that that's been completely built out yet in terms of the public access. So I'll look into that and I'll make sure to provide more information about it.
Thank you.
Dan?
Thank you for the presentation. Curious how something massive like this, just if you could talk real briefly, how does it come together in terms of, does the district kind of come up with a concept, model it and go, yeah, this will work, and then hand it off to somebody else to final design and build? Or how does that all sort of, happen that we know it's going to work and, kind of go from concept to reality?
Yeah, so Everglades restoration has been in the works for a long time. So in the 90s, there was a big effort in order to build what's known as the Yellow Book. And so you may be familiar with the Governor's Commission to put together a plan about restoration, and then the Yellow Book, which was the plan and framework for how Everglades restoration would unfold. And then after that was authorized in 2000, then there have been subsets of these planning projects, Everglades restoration subsets. So the Central Everglades Planning Project is one, Western Everglades Restoration Project is another, the Lake Okeechobee Watershed Restoration Project, Biscayne Bay Coastal Wetlands. All of these are sort of sub-planning projects that then define a number of features within a planning study area. And so how that works is a planning delivery team between the South Florida Water Management District and the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers put that together. They invite stakeholders to participate as part of that planning study, and then work on a number of specific infrastructure features that would deliver the desired results for that planning study. Then get that authorized by Congress, get funding from Congress and the state legislature in order to support those features. And then the Corps of Engineers and the South Florida Water Management District decide who's going to take the lead on design and construction. And so we use the integrated delivery schedule, which is this giant spreadsheet that has all of the projects listed on it and outlines who's going to take the lead on design and construction for each of those features. And then we request budget support in order to be able to meet that schedule and then move out on that. A few of the features are also supported by others, like Department of Transportation. We have some natural areas that are being supported, projects that are being supported through either county or municipal governments and things like that. But mostly it's either the South Florida Water Management District or the Corps of Engineers takes the lead.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions from the board? Buzzy, is there any public comment?
Yes, we have Brad Cornell of Audubon. Mr. Cornell, you'll have 3 minutes for comments.
Good afternoon, Brad Cornell with Audubon. Oops, that was quick. I'm flies.
Okay, that's it. Thank you. I swear I hit clear, right? And then start. I don't know why it's doing that.
Doesn't like me.
Yeah, I don't know.
Comes Troy.
The hook. The cavalry, right?
Okay, Mr. Troy, what did you push?
When it's done, you hit me.
So thank you for the opportunity to address you, Madam Chair and board members. And Jennifer Reynolds, thank you very much for the updates and the reports. That's a big parcel of projects and land and importance. So obviously this is something that is years in the making and years in the construction. There's a couple of points I want to share. And one is regarding the Tamiami Trail. There's a question in our mind, and I don't know the answer to the question, but that has to do with the contrast between the western side of the Tamiami Trail and the eastern side of the Tamiami Trail. And the issue is, well, first, let me just say opportunistically, I think we should be looking at, as we put in bridges or look at transparency, we should also not just be looking at hydrologic transparency, but also wildlife movement. So there's been a overdue need for wildlife underpasses on Tamiami Trail, recognizing that the Picayune Strand project is the Panther PHU mitigation bank for all of SERP. We need a crossing in the vicinity of Picayune Strand and some other places along the trail. But also there's this question about sea level rise and the march of mangroves north, saltwater habitats taking over our freshwater marshes and wet prairies. And it may be that Tamiami Trail actually is doing us a favor ecologically in delaying the sort of marine influence on our freshwater habitats. So maybe that levee sort of, that dam sort of function, if we were going to put in bridges, is there some way we can have one-way gates, if I can put it that way? And I'm not an engineer, and this is really out of my wheelhouse. I'm speaking in a room full of engineers, but there's got to be a way to help work with the problems that we see addressing the Everglades ecosystems that are going to be inundated with saltwater. And then the final thing I just wanted to raise is looking at our earlier conversation about water quality, the Picayune Strand as this very welcome completion of the Picayune Strand and the plugging of the Miller Canal, which, having 60 heavy equipment operators. It's so exciting. However, there is a water quality problem coming off of agricultural lands in the area of 92 Tomato Road and US 41, and we know that it's been that way for a long time. The data show that. So I just want to check in with the district on the plans for source control on the Littman farms. And so I know there's a two-phase strategy on that. There should be some good outcomes on that in the collaboration with the farmers. I'm raising that. It's still as relevant as ever. So that collaboration hopefully is moving forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Brad. Other public comment?
Yes, we have Jay Mr. Collagan. You will have 3 minutes for your comments, and I hit repeat, so we're going to be good here.
Yeah, Jay Colhagen here for the record. Hey, I'm just concerned about the bridge going across number 4, okay? It's right there where that's at. There's a campground right there. What's going to happen to that campground? It's a skunk ape research, whatever. It's a nice campground there, and it's right there. I'm looking at it.
Please address your comments to the board, sir.
Okay. Hey, I'm just wondering what's going to happen to the campground right there when they put this bridge right there. Is that going to shut that down, or? You really can look at. I'm looking at it. It overlays right where that campground is, and I'm sure you guys know about that research center there, the skunk ape, and it's a real nice place, nice camping, a lot of entertainment there. We're having some weddings out there now, and stuff like that. I just want to make sure that doesn't impact them. So do some look at that location.
Thank you.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Thank you. We'll be happy to look at it. Thank you for raising it. Any other public comment?
Not at this time.
Okay, thank you very much. Any other board questions for Jennifer Reynolds? No, I don't see any other questions. Thank you so much for being here today, Jen. Excellent presentation. That brings us to board comment, our first board comment period, and we'll go ahead and we'll begin with Michelle McLeod.
Sure. I wanted to take this opportunity to thank the staff and FWC for organizing our trip to Lake Trafford. Like I told Lisa, I've been dying to get out to Lake Trafford for years and years and years. Ever since I was on the Tourist Development Council, Buzzy, we were there together making decisions on funding some of those restoration projects. So that was a great opportunity. I also wanted to make mention something that I learned from that tour. So while we were on the lake, of course, we're talking about what are some of the main causes of the deterioration of the lake, and one of which is the runoff from the adjacent lands. And in that conversation, it was mentioned that the county is thinking about developing the land adjacent to the lake on the east side and possibly looking at building affordable housing for the residents of Immokalee out there. And when I heard that, I was like, oh my gosh, I'm on the Housing Alliance board and I know nothing about this project. So after the tour, on my drive back home, I called Michael Puala, who's the president of the Housing Alliance. I'm like, do you know anything about this project? And he said, actually, he had just gotten off of a call with the county staff about it. And essentially, the county is considering purchasing 2,200 acres east of the lake, and potentially using 300 acres of that 2,200 acres for affordable housing. It has not been purchased right now. They are in a 90-day due diligence period looking at the environmental impacts of that parcel. But because I didn't know anything about it, I don't know if you all knew anything about it, and I just wanted to make mention so that we're all kept in the loop, especially because that land is adjacent to the lake and what kind of implications that could have, positive or negative. So brought that up. But again, thank you so much for organizing. I really enjoyed that tour on Lake Trafford.
Thank you, Michelle. Dan?
Nothing for me. Thank you.
Okay, Andy?
Got a couple things. Recently, Everglades Coalition had their 40th, I believe the 40th annual conference, which I've attended 10 of them. And I'll be glad to, if anyone has any questions. And I was going to get into this, that there was a particularly noteworthy event occurred at this year's event. Our chair, Charlotte Roman, has had numerous accolades and been recognized for her great work, but this may be the most noteworthy recognition as being recognized as the Swamp Queen. And I believe that you have there a python crown. So seriously, congratulations. I think the recognition was well deserved. Maybe not in the normal course that you're used to receiving some of your accolades of all the things you do, but congratulations. So.
Well, it was certainly unexpected. And yes, those were vertebrae from a python that was captured in Southwest Florida, I'm told. So it's one of our pythons. So that was a good thing.
Well, I can just say, wow. It's just like, I hope you got to keep the crown. Congratulations, Queen. I want to echo what Michelle said. The Lake Trafford tour was fantastic. Airboat. Thank you, Lisa, for putting it together, and for Brad was on my boat. We had a lot of fun. Learned a lot. The guides were fantastic. I mean, I learned more in that hour than I could possibly in just reading and etc. But thank you.
Nothing for me.
Nothing for Michael. You know, that's really terrific that you took the time out of your very busy schedules to go out there and really see what's going on out there. And hopefully you'll have some opportunities to do other things as well. I was out in the field with the Corps of Engineers last week and some of the team from the Basin looking at the Picayune Strand Restoration Project. And it was really a terrific orientation to the works that's being done on the final stretch, which is the Miller Canal plugging. And the heavy equipment teams from the U.S. Corps of Engineers are making incredible progress because of our dry weather that has provided the conditions for where they can really gain some ground. They're halfway through with the Miller Canal, and they're continuing full speed ahead as long as they have good conditions. I want to thank Steve Basin and Kehoe Harden for the great orientation on the ground. And later, the State Forest Service, one of our other partners out at the Picayune Strand, Michael Joel, Mike Weston, Jeff Pilato, and the pilot took us on a flight over the Picayune Strand, and it's incredible. The FACA Union Canal that was plugged last year, I think it was completed in June of last year. From the air, you could see how it's already grown in and it's starting to come back. When we flew over the Southwest Protection Feature, the part that was done and the banks were already sodded, the grasses all in and doing its job to prevent erosion. And the Miller Canal was just moving right along. And so I want to thank them for giving me and the team here at the Basin, Lisa and Brad, the opportunity to go up and to appreciate the project. I mean, it's hard to look at 85 square miles on the ground, right? But when you get up in the air and you have that vantage point, and you can really see what is really happening there. So the Corps is still committed to finishing that project by the end of the year. And so we'll be having a ribbon cutting coming up in our future at such time. So I want to thank everyone for that support. With that, let's go to our technical reports. Our first report, Mike Barber with the field station activity.
Good afternoon, Madam Chair and board members. I'm Mike Barber. I'm supervisor for the Big Cypress Field Station Basin, and I'll be presenting the activities report for the field station today. We will go over a few things on the overview. We're going to go over the field station pump station operations, maintenance activities, and the 3-month outlook. We have completely done the automation of the 951 structure. With this automation, it can be controlled now remotely by the operation and control room. But it will be controlled remotely by the operations and control center. Here you see Mikhail and James working on the control panel. You also see Mikhail, James, and Francisco pulling wire for the panel for the solar system. Here you see Mikhail finishing up the wiring for the control panel and the RTU unit. Right now, there are 33 structures in the Big Cypress Basin. This is the basin only, no pumps, Picayune strand restoration. 55% are capable of remote operations. By doing all of this work in-house on this automation, we saved the district $26,000.
Wow, that's great.
And it will be a continuous savings due to the fact that staff members do not have to go out at night or on the weekends to do manual gate changes.
Mhm. That's fantastic.
Other things we do is gate repairs. This gate is one of our maintenance ramp gates. It was vandalized. We have this sometimes on different areas where people want to use the canals and they just tear the gates down. As you can see here, they ran into the gate, tore it out of the ground. Previously, they had cut the tab, so it was chain shut for the time being. Field station staff was able to repair this gate, reinstall it. As you see, James and friend Akeem pouring concrete around it to help prevent this from happening again. We continue with our mechanical harvesting and vegetation removal in our canals. Here you see Mr. Akeem with one of the pieces of equipment we have, the truck saw, putting vegetation on the bank. You also see Mr. Akeem on removing clippings near the turbidity curtain. We set these curtains in sections as to do the harvesting section at the time so that any of the clippings doesn't flow through the whole canal system. Once it's put on the bank, we go out with our grapple truck and remove it from the bank and dispose of it. Other debris that we remove from the canal sometimes, a snake. Here you see a python at the Golden Gate 3 structure, and you see Mr. Francisco on the conver removing a trampoline from the Golden Gate main canal system. There was a shed that was found at the bridge on the Faca Union Canal. Here you see Mr. Dre using the boom truck that we acquired from the Clouston Field Station, removing the shed. And you also see Mr. Francisco ready on the load to be hauled and transported for disposal. Other things that we do here, a tree had fell across the I-75 canal. The conver was used by Mr. Francisco to bring the tree from the west side of the bank to the east side, where Willie cut it up and it was stacked up and later removed for disposal. This conver that you're seeing is also one of the pieces of equipment that we do use for the mechanical harvest. Sometimes people decide to wash their cars in our canals. Nobody was hurt in this accident, believe me. Here you see a fully submerged car in the Faca Union Canal system. After it was removed, after it was securely hooked up by the Collier County Sheriff's Office dive team. With these accidents, there's sometimes damage to the canal bank. More damage is done taking them out than when they go in. So sometimes it's minor repair. Here you see Willie raking it down and leveling it with a shovel. You also see once it's done how it looks. Other times there's major damage, and when there's major damage, the district goes to the insurance company from the automobile owners for reimbursement for cost. These tough booms were installed at the Henderson Creek Canal. This is where the Marco Island water treatment plant intake is for the water. The purpose of these booms is to help keep vegetation and debris, litter, stuff like that from stopping up their intake and causing them a problem or having to go out there and continue to clean them. So this was just a thing we did for them because they work with us, so we work with those guys there too. Other items that we do in-house, we replace and repair our trailers. Here you see Francisco and James beginning to repair and replace the lumber on one of our transport trailers. You also see the trailer that has been completed. In this time, we also did the heavy equipment trailer, which is for a low boy to haul like our long reach and stuff like that. Now we will go into the 3-month outlook. We will continue with our structure inspection program repairs. The Basin staff has 110 of these repairs. 29 of those will be contracted out to a dive company for the underwater portion of it. We will continue debris and vegetation removal in our canals. We will complete the replacement at the FACA Union 4 for the generator, and we will respond to dry season gate changes. Now we'll go over the comprehensive Everglades Restoration Project activity report. Here you see pump station staff installing safety reflectors at the fiber optic boxes. These boxes are along the 52nd Avenue and the entrances to all 3 pump stations. The purpose of these reflectors are to help with the road maintenance and mowing crews to know where these boxes are at to prevent damage, and so we don't lose communications to our pump stations. And as you see Josh, Andre, and Raphael using a hydraulic fence post hammer to put these posts in. We also removed the gates or the stop logs from the new culverts on 41. We used a company called Road Safe to do a modification of the traffic after we secured the proper permits from Florida Department of Transportation. We closed 1 lane of this road to be able to do it safely. Here you see one of the stop logs before it was removed, and you also see Road Safe directing the traffic. There was 3 of these gates that were removed. They were removed, loaded onto the crane truck, and they were transported and put in storage. With the removal of these gates, this allows the water from the Picayune Strand to flow under 41 and continue south. At this time, we would like to thank the Miami Field Station for their use of their crane truck and their assistance from their operator, Mike Wyatt. The Merritt Pump Station has 2 electric low-flow pumps. The first electric pump was removed last year. It was overhauled, reinstalled. So they have now removed the second pump. And here you see the electric motor for that pump has been loaded and ready for transport. Here you see the remaining pieces to the pump that has been loaded and ready for transport. This was sent to Tampa to get completely overhauled, and they will be reinstalled and back running before wet season. And a side note to this is these pumps had over 18,000 hours of service before we had to overhaul. The 3-month outlook for the pump stations, they will respond to dry season pump orders and issues. They will reinstall the overhauled low-flow pump at the Merritt pump station by wet season, and they will start their FY25 structure inspection program repairs, which they only had 14 out there. At this time, I would like to thank the entire staff, Basin staff, for their assistance and input on my presentation.
Thank you.
Yes, ma'am.
Any questions for Mr. Barber? Go ahead, PJ.
Just a quick one. It's probably a dumb question. Do you put those gates back in? And
On
no.
these, no, ma'am. We was told when those come out, they're not going back in right now.
Okay, excellent. And I'm assuming somebody knows it's probably intentional that they put a shed into a canal. if you ever find out who it is, do you go find them or what? I mean, what a waste of time.
Well, with something like that, you don't, you know, you could spend the time riding up and down the canal to look to see if you could find where it came from. It's probably just something that came from a thunderstorm or a windstorm. It
Yeah.
wasn't secured properly, so it just fell into the canal.
Okay. Thank you.
ma'am.
Welcome.
Any other questions?
Quick one.
ahead.
Is there any major repairs or maintenance issues that are out of what you would consider normal?
No, sir.
Okay.
A lot of the stuff we do, like I said, we do in-house.
Right.
We try to do in-house, but
So no major financial outlays for new something or others, a new that we aren't aware of already.
not that I know of. I mean, I can check and see and then get back with you.
Thank you.
And I'd like to pass along my thanks to the team that was at the Miller Pump Station when we were out for our visit last week. It was really great that they set up a table for us to sit and have conversation over our lunch, and I want to thank the guys for that.
Yes, ma'am. We're always happy to assist.
Thank you so much. That's all. Okay, let's move on to our next technical report, our water conditions report. Mr. Tredick?
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair, board members. Good afternoon. My name is Bill Tredick. I'm lead engineer with the Big Cypress Basin. I'll be presenting the Big Cypress Basin Water Conditions Report, and I will, following in footsteps of Brad, who's done it in the past, I'll do my best to live to that standard. We'll see how it goes. I want to begin with a brief overview of what we experienced in 2024. You've seen these graphs before. The graph on the left shows in red the rainfall that we received in each month of 2024. Next to those bars on the left, you see in kind of a transparent blue what the average normal rainfall is for those months. And you can see from these graphs that 2024 was really wet. And you're all aware of that. Almost 71 inches average over the basin, 80 inches in some locations. It was a very wet year, 15 inches more than normal, 126% of a normal year rainfall. And like many of our years, it's not a consistent flow of rainfall over the year. It's feast or famine. You've got some very wet months, some very dry months. 2024 started out very wet. If you look at those January, February, March, all of those were considerably above normal rainfalls. And then the switch turned off, the faucet turned off, and we got dry for a couple months. And then June came along and we had Invest that dropped the Invest dropped 11 inches in 3 days. Overall, 17 inches of rain in June, which is extreme. I mean, that's an extreme event. Fortunately, going into that, we had been pretty dry, so we handled it very easily. July and August were above average. Debbie came through in August and we handled it pretty well. They were above average. September was about an average month, which could have been worse, but Helene missed us. It went a little bit north. And so it was a rather dry storm. I think it only dropped about 2.5 inches of rain on us. So we got very lucky there. And then 2 weeks later, Milton came through and we got a lot of rain from that. I think we got about almost 7 inches of rain from Milton. And after Milton, it just ended. I mean, the rainfalls pretty much stopped on October 10th. Our meteorologist said the dry season's here, Milton passed. And so there we go. November and the rest of October was extremely dry. November was extremely dry. December, even though this graph shows it above normal, it was dry until the 30th because all that rain came at the end of the month. So we had two and a half months, basically 2 2/3 months of extremely dry conditions. But that being said, all in all, it was a very wet year and a good year for rainfalls. But I want to point something out on this map on the right. Let's see if this, yeah. So you see where the yellow arrow is? Most of the rain in 2024 came relatively close to the coast. The peak rainfall was around the Golden Gate Basin, but the basins to the northeast saw average, or in some cases even slightly below average rainfalls. And what does that mean? Well, it's a little harder for us to retain water when it falls at the coast than it is when it falls up in the headwaters. Our coastal structures are a little different than our structures further upstream. Like at the Cocohatchee, we have fixed crest weirs, so we can only hold it to a certain level and then it goes out into the estuary. And the same thing with the Golden Gate structures. The weirs only go up so much because they're weir controls, not gate controls. So they only go up so much, and then that water continues to overflow and overtop those weirs. So we don't have the same level of ability to hold water back when it rains at the coast as we do when it rains, say, in the Corkscrew Swamp. So there is it matters a little bit where the rainfall falls. That was my takeaway from that. So going back, looking a little more closely at November and December, as I mentioned earlier, they were very, very dry. And December, like I said, was very, very dry till the end of the month. And that rain that came at the end of December, again, was along the coast. We didn't have much up in the headwaters of the system. So it's very important going into this dry season that we had to manage and hold back as much water as we can because we knew the forecasts were for a dry winter, so we want to try to conserve as much of that water as we could. January was a lot like November, very, very dry, only 40% of the normal rainfall. And February saw a continuation of this dry trend with rainfall significantly below normal up until Monday, where we got a little over an inch, or on average, right about an inch across the basin. Some areas were more closer to an inch and a half, and some areas were a little below an inch. But all of that rain in February, except for maybe a small trace of it, fell on Monday. So the good news is it was more evenly distributed across the basin. And if you look at the graph up here, the majority of the heavier rains fell a little bit towards the headwaters, which helped boost levels a little bit upstream. So that was a good takeaway from that. So how did a wet summer followed by a dry winter impact our efforts to maintain water levels? That's the question. So I wanted to look a little bit at the Corkscrew Swamp area. The graph on the left shows the water levels at Corkscrew Swamp. That station is right about there, about 5-6 miles north of the Cork 2 structure. And I want to look a little bit at these trends. The kind of lavender purple line is 2024. The orangish line is 2023. The blue line is this year. And you can see that we're following the 2023 trajectory because the rains stopped earlier. 2024, we had those rains that really didn't stop until about there. And so that trend, that decline comes, when the rain turns off, the water comes down. That's just what happens. But when it happens depends upon the rainfall. So it's hugely dependent upon when the rain shuts off. In this case, this year, you can even see the little bump where we had the rain Monday, because I updated these graphs after that rainfall to try to capture what that impact was. So I just brought up a similar slide with the Cork 2 structure. These are what we call our cyclic analysis, which looks at the history of rainfall at a site, the history of water levels, I should say, at a site, and figures out what those various percentiles are. And you can see we've done a really good job of holding the water levels high at Cork 2. But even though we've held it higher at Cork 2, it's interesting to note that the Corkscrew Swamp came down because of the lack of rainfall. So we've been very successful in holding those levels very similar to what we did in 2024 at that structure. Although it's before the rainfall on Monday, I would say it was probably starting to take the normal dive that it takes every year. So we bought about a week with that 1-inch rain. And then my prediction is if we don't get more rain, which isn't in the forecast for the next week, we're going to see that make that turn and start going down again. That's just what happens every year. So it's kind of interesting. This is an interesting graph. The blue area, and you've seen these before, is what we try to maintain the ranges, try to maintain our water levels in that range. We try to maintain Cork 2 at the top of the range for as long as we can. Cork 2 hasn't opened since the end of January. It's been completely closed. So the decline has nothing to do with gate operations. It's just what happens as we get into the really deep part of dry season. So despite the dry winter, water levels in the Corkscrew Regional Ecosystem Watershed are actually doing pretty well. I had originally worked on this slide a couple of weeks ago, and some of these, especially the one down at Bird Rookery, was right getting close to going into the orange, into the 25th percentile. And that rainfall brought it back up to 50 percentile. So it is so responsive to rainfall. In the next weeks, it's going to come down. In the next report, probably they'll be orange. They'll be more than likely below the 25th percentile, because that's a trend that without rain it's just what will happen up there. The Corkscrew Watershed Initiative is looking at this, trying to figure out ways to extend that hydro period a little bit to the benefit of the ecosystem, but we're still a little away. You're going to be seeing presentations on that in the coming months, and you'll have a lot more information to digest and learn about that. We're not quite there yet, but we're making good progress. The exhibit, the map to the left shows that by and large, we're pretty average. That shows the water levels in the various canals and the percentiles of where it is historically in the various canals. We're a mixture of green and blue and black. A year ago, when Brad gave this presentation, those were all black except for one canal segment, which was blue. So they were all at 90% because of that dry winter, or excuse me, that wet winter we had in January, February, March. So those canal levels were quite high last year. This is more typical and actually pretty good considering we've been so dry. I want to point out that down at Picayune Strand, you see half of it or 2/3 of it is blue, which is pretty good. And the left portion, the west portion, is green. That's the Miller area, is shown as green because until last month, that was draining straight to tide. So that's gonna, when you see this map in the future, I expect that you will see the colors. I can't say that they'll be blue every year because they're going to be depending upon where the water levels are, but they should be pretty close to the same colors all the way across, because the sheet flowing of all three pump stations moving water down there will spread that water out, and you should see a balanced distribution of water levels in that system in the future. So since we're talking about Picayune Strand, it was a great year in so many ways. We pumped a lot of water, and you can see the volume. And I was going to come up with some numbers like it's 80,000 Olympic-sized swimming pools, but that loses meaning because 80,000, I can't really picture that. And 100,000 Olympic-sized swimming pools of water fell on the land, but I can't picture that easily either. And then I thought, well, how many, if you have a 1 acre lot, is that 30 miles high of water? You know, there's all these different comparisons. It's a lot of water. And all that water would have gone straight down the canals into the estuary had that area not been restored. And that's a huge lift for the wetlands that receive the water and are gonna, the chair talked about how good everything's looking and how it's coming in, and the grass is coming in, the vegetation's coming in. It's great for that, but it's also good for the ecosystem downstream because that water doesn't go straight out with all those nutrients, straight out with all that turbidity. It gets filtered through the marsh. And so you're going to see a real benefit both in the wetland portions of the Strand as well as the downstream estuaries. And when the Miller pump station comes online, it's going to help even more. I can't say we'll get these numbers every year because this was a wet year, but when Miller comes online, this, you know, it's going to continue to benefit us long into the future, and it's a great project. You can see the area in green is the area that's been restored, the Miller Canal. When you see this a year from now, that area will be in green also because that will be fully restored in 2025. And as soon as the rains come back on, which we hope will be Mayish, maybe June, this pump will be running. Right now, we can't pump because there's not water to pump, and they're still working a little bit downstream, plugging those canals. But as soon as we have the water to do so, we'll begin pumping, and that restoration will begin in earnest. So I want to just show a few pictures from the field that were taken back on the 20th. On this slide, it shows how the plugging process of the Miller Canal is progressing. In the center top, you can see the operations in progress. You see the equipment moving around out there. It's not a video, so you can't really see it moving, but you see where it is in an area that's actively being plugged. Just below that in the middle, you can see a portion where it's been plugged and been graded. And you'll note that it's all pretty level. There's some areas there that still have water because when they dug these canals, they side cast the material off to the side. And then when they restore plug the canals, they move that material back in. And there's always a loss in that process. You see it in this, you see it in when they do dragline restoration in the marshes. You never have quite as much coming back due to erosion and other things that gradually those mounds of dirt subside. But that's actually a good thing because these little holes, these little areas that hold water are going to be habitat. And when this thing's fully restored, there'll be some refuge for some of the immature species out there. There's a lot of benefits to having these deep water pools, not deep, but deeper water pools when these things are flooded. So it's a good thing. On the right, or excuse me, I lost track there. On the bottom left is a picture looking north up the Miller Canal. You can see where the canal was plugged. And the water now goes into the pump bay. So that's how everything south of that will be plugged and plugs all the way down to the very bottom, basically, of the Picayune Strand. And over on the right, and I think you saw this picture or one very similar in an earlier presentation, that's looking south. Now, they've already moved, and when we talked a week ago, we were thinking they were about a third of the way down, but we got the recent report today, and they're about halfway down on the Miller Canal. So they're moving very quickly. This plugging is going to be, the plugging at least, is going to be done hopefully by wet season. There might be some continuing work a little bit into the summer and 2025, but this is going to be ready to pump as soon as the rain comes. And we're going to see that environmental lift as soon as we get there. So, and I hope I can get this video to work right. It's cycling now, but you've seen it before. It's kind of shows the water depth and the level of the water above the ground. The areas in red are where especially on the right graph, is where the water's below the ground. The areas that get yellow and blue and so forth are where the water's above the ground. But one area I wanted to point out, and the reason I put this slide back in here, if I can, oh, wrong screen. Hang on one second. I'll pause it there. You can see where Miller Canal is, right there. It's interesting to see before these canal plugs how much of an impact that has and how it drew the water table down. The water's below the surface out there all along that canal, not just on the side berms that are there, or were there before the plugging, but for a distance out because that canal draws the water table down. You look to the right, the area that's been restored, it's a whole different signature. That's the area you see a dispersed pattern of water. You see water at, or in some cases, just below ground level, but at ground level, above ground level in some areas, but it's spread out. And that's just a huge benefit. And a year from now, Miller Canal is going to look like that. You're going to see this dispersed pattern of water as it sheet flows across the land and makes its way south. So I won't go into too much more detail on that. The purpose of the slide today was just to show you the difference between that, but it's also very good up in the Corkscrew Swamp area. It clearly shows the decline when I let it run. Oh, I keep clicking the wrong screen. It shows that water decline, and you've seen this before, so I won't go into a lot of detail on it. But what's interesting is those levels match so closely with what we're seeing in the water stages at the Cork 2 structure. So I have a lot of confidence in this graphic. And it's going to be interesting to see it a year from now when that Miller Canal is fully plugged and restored. So despite the dry season being abnormally dry, we're not seeing a lot of concern, of high-level concerns. In fact, we're not seeing any real high-level concerns regarding groundwater at this time. We're very much like 2023. The trends are Monday's rainfall helped give groundwater a little boost and brought back levels to the 50th percentile. We're getting a little bit low in the C104R over by, that's near the Cocoa 1 structure. Things were starting to go down a little there, and the rain, you can see it from the graph. how much that 1-inch rain helped bump that water level back up. So, you know, it's important that we get these periodic rains during the dry season to help keep us hydrated. The others are very similar. Everything was tracking. The other three that I've got here, one is up near Lake Trafford, one is down near the Henderson Creek HC1 structure. All of them are very similar. They're all at or above the 50th percentile, which is actually pretty good considering how dry we've been. So there's really not a lot of concern on groundwater at this point. We're watching it. You know, it's something we will continue to monitor and see how this next couple of months goes, but we're doing pretty well despite the dry winter. So I've talked a lot about 2023 and how we're very similar to 2023. I just wanted to show a couple of slides. One on the Faki Union Canal. Faki Union Canal is pretty typical for this time of year right now. We hold back about 7 feet of water at this point. 7 feet of water at the Faki Union 5 structure was about halfway up the system. That's a lot of water we're able to hold back and keep in the upper reaches of the Faki Union system. If that structure weren't there, that would flow down, right down, all the way down the Faki Union Canal to the pump station, and we'd have to pump it. So by holding it, we're providing a groundwater benefit, we're providing an ecological benefit, and we're protecting ourselves should we move into a drought condition. So it's really important that we keep that water up there as high in the headwaters of the system as we can. It's a trend this year very similar to the 2023 trend. Levels are likely to begin their decline in the coming weeks. We hold the gates closed. They haven't opened in a long time, but the water comes down anyway. That's just what happens, as I said before, when the rainfall stops. So those, you can see from 2023 how those water levels come down. And we probably bought ourselves about a week longer before those, with that 1-inch rain, but they're going to make that turn and they're going to come down. That's just what happens this time of year. Down at the Faki Union 1 structure, we're matching what we saw in 2023. We're still discharging water over the weir. It's I think about 4 inches of water going over the weir right now. So the weir is in, I think it's elevation, used to be different datum 2.0, now it's 0.6 something NAVD versus NGVD, which I won't get into. That's a whole datum conversion thing. But right now we're still discharging a little water over that weir. That's probably going to stop in March unless we get some significant rainfall. That's just the seasonal decline. That's pretty much what happens in this type of a year. Golden Gate Main Canal, very similar trend to 2023, just like Faki Union. In fact, the one thing I will say about the Golden Gate system is we're doing a little better than 2023 up at GG4. You can see we're managing to hold water levels a little higher in the upstream reaches, which is a good thing because we really can't hold water downstream much higher because, as I mentioned before, those weirs have a maximum elevation. So when they crest the weirs, we can have them all the way closed, but when we crest the weirs and the water is going to go down to the weir elevation over a period of time, and then it's going to recede without rain. So it's really important that we're doing well upstream, and we are. You know, we're in 2023, I just want to point this out. Right there in 2023, there was a 2-inch rainfall in April that really gave us the system a boost. A lot bigger than the boost we got with the 1-inch rain this week. So we'll probably need a rainfall similar to that or something. Doesn't have to be 2 inches, but maybe 1 or 2 1-inch rains over the next couple of months to stay above that 2023 trend. But you know, where are we going to be? My last question here is the rest of the dry season. And I meant to have the question mark there because I don't really know what it's going to bring, but we have some ideas what it's going to bring. I got ahead of my notes here. As I mentioned before, things have been really dry since Milton came through. We're not in a drought, but as of the end of January, the U.S. Seasonal Drought Outlook listed us as drought development likely, which means we're not there, but we need to be keeping an eye on things. The outlook through April is projected to be below average. So this, again, parallels that 2023 trend. I mean, we've been here before. there's really nothing to be overly concerned about. We just need to keep an eye on it. We're going to do everything we can to hold back as much water as we can. The forecast fortunately sees above average potential in May and July, May through July. So the dry weather will end. We'll get into the wet season, and hopefully the La Nina will subside and we'll get into a more typical wet season, and we'll have some rains in early summer. And that should recharge the system pretty quickly. So the takeaways from all of this, which is what I was trying to tie it all together, is we've been here before. This is just very, very similar to 2023. Hopefully we get a wetter summer than we got in 2023. We're going to continue to conserve as much water as possible in the system over the next 3 months. We're in a little better position going into this dry weather than we were in 2023. So there's an old movie or book called Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. I don't know if any of you ever seen it, but the catchphrase was "Don't panic." I think it's a don't panic thing. There's no reason to be overly concerned, but we have to monitor. We just need 1 or 2 decent rains to, inch here, inch there, and we'll be in pretty good shape. So with that concludes, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Are there board questions for William? I don't see any questions. Thank you so much for your presentation.
Thank you very much.
All right, that brings us to the monthly financial report and preliminary budget discussion with Candida Heater. Candy?
Good afternoon, Madam Chair. It's Julie Maytalk standing in for Candy.
All right, Julie, good to have you this afternoon.
I wanted to present to you today the briefing on the monthly financial report for the month of December. As of the end of December, with 25% of your fiscal year completed, your ad valorem tax collections are $12.2 million, or 85.1% of the total budgeted amount of $14.3 million. As of now, your ad valorem collections are on trend based on last year, and I have no issues to report. Moving on to your expenditures and encumbrances through the first quarter, as of now, you are 44.9% or $14.3 million obligated, of which $1.7 million has been expended and $12.6 million is encumbered on contracts and purchase orders. Operations and maintenance is where your largest budget resides, and that is made up primarily of your field station operations and capital program projects. Overall, Madam Chair, both from a revenue and expenditure standpoint, the Basin is doing well. This concludes my report, and if you don't have any questions, I can move on to the preliminary budget presentation.
Are there any questions from the board at this point in Julie's briefing? There's no questions, so move on to the budget.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'd like to go over the next steps for your fiscal year 2025-2026 budget and how your staff will be working on those next steps in the budget development process. Next slide. Your fiscal year 2025-26 budget begins in October of 2025 and ends in September of 2026. Some of your upcoming key milestones to complete that budget are: March 1st, legislative comments are due back to the district on the fiscal year 2025-26 preliminary budget that was submitted statutorily on January 15th. If we receive any comments from the legislature, your staff must respond by March 15th. March 4th, the legislative session begins. Between the months of March and April, your budget staff will be working with your Basin administrator and the various areas that support the Basin work plan to review and update what is to be submitted to the legislature, what was submitted to the legislature at the preliminary timeframe. We will bring that back to you all at the April 25th meeting. May 2nd is when the legislative session officially ends. The next major deadlines supporting your tentative budget process are July 1. This is the statutory deadline for when the taxable values are to be received from the county property appraisers. If an extension is requested by a county and granted by the Department of Revenue, The county will have an extra day, 10 days to submit their property values. Madam Chair, we typically have not seen this with Collier County. July 7th is when we come back to see you all to establish and approve the tentative millage rate and budget. These will then be included in the July 10th District Governing Board meeting, which is where the board approves the millage rates for the certification to property appraisers to set the proposed millage rate cap. Next slide. August 1 is when we submit statutorily to the governor and the legislature the district's tentative budget for review. So we submitted our preliminary budget January 15th, and then we submit our tentative budget on August 1st. And these are statutory requirements. August 4th is when we certify the proposed millage rates to the county property appraisers to set the cap. And August 22nd is when we will be back to bring you your final millage rate and budget for your approval, which is then included in the district's budget for approval at the September 11th Governing Board special meeting. The Governing Board will approve the tentative millage rates and budget at this meeting. September 16th is the due date for any comments from the governor and the Legislative Budget Commission on our August 1st tentative budget submission. This is 5 days before our final public budget hearing on September 23rd at 5:15. This hearing is when the Governing Board approves for adoption the fiscal year 2025-26 final millage rates and budget. Next slide. So, Madam Chair and Basin Board members, the next steps to tying up your tentative budget submission, we will continue to refine our fiscal year 2025-2026 Big Cypress Basin revenue and expenditure budget. We will be working with Lisa and the Basin staff to make updates and report back to the Basin Board on those tentative budget updates. Some potential changes that we will be bringing you for the fiscal year 2025-26 tentative draft budget and financial forecast are capital program updates. These will be based on refined cash flows working with engineering construction on the projects, staff allocations that support the Big Cypress Basin work plan, and finally, revenue updates to ad valorem projections, investment earnings, and the updated audited fiscal year 2023-2024 fund balance. Madam Chair, this concludes my presentation. Do you have any comments or questions?
Thank you, Julie. Let's see if the board members have any questions or comments. Are there any questions from the board members? I don't have any questions. Let's see if there's any public comment. Buzzy?
Not at this time.
Okay, you got off easy, Julie. Thank you so much. I know how hard you're working with the legislative session about ready to begin. So thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you, Madam Chair and Basin members.
All right, that brings us to general public comment. Again, this is another chance for members of the public to speak on anything that has not been covered in today's meeting. Buzzy, is there any public comment?
There is not.
Okay, then this is the time for final board comment, and we'll go ahead and start with this end. Michelle?
Nothing for me, thank you.
Okay, Vice Chair Waters?
Good here. Thank you.
Andy?
Nothing from me.
PJ?
Nothing for me.
Michael?
Me.
And I have nothing other than to thank the board for such a great meeting, and I really, really appreciate all of the work that you're doing. And I know this budget is going to be challenging for us, so there'll be more work ahead. And I'd like to do a special thank you to not only the staff in general, but Wildad for assisting with us putting this meeting together. I know she had to jump in there and help us out. So I want to thank everyone, all the Basin staff, Lisa, you and your entire team for such a good meeting today and putting everything together seamlessly. So thank you so much. And the next Basin Board meeting is going to be April 25th, 2025. And with that, we're adjourned.